All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, we're glad to have you, and we will answer some of your direct questions that you have after this. You can just type them in down below into the feed, and we'll get to them at the end of the podcast, whatever questions you may have.
And you can type them in the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to wait till the end. Just type them in. We'll scroll through thereafter and answer them. This is, for those of you that are joining us for the first time, this is the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast, but we're doing a live stream with it too. So you can share this out with your friends or do whatever else you need with that. Are we ready to start the podcast proper?
I'm ready.
Ready.
All right. Sounds good. Chad's got his V8. He's very ready. Welcome to the podcast. It's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee with our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
Hi, everybody.
And our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hello.
And we are going to answer more of your cycling and triathlon-related questions today, right now. You can submit them to us at trainerroad.com/podcast all throughout the week. We'll roll through that list every week, and then we add in the questions that we can answer at that point that we'll have enough time for. Before we get into the questions, just a reminder, the Cyclocross Nationals event is going to be going on, or of course the Nationals event, but we're having an event that coincides with it on the Saturday just before the pros race in that evening. So if you're here for the event, you can swing by TrainerRoad. I think Sierra Nevada is going to be bringing in a bunch of refreshments, shall I say. We'll have some light refreshments in terms of food as well. Where it looks like, I'm not going to say their names yet because it isn't confirmed, but we have two pros that have said yes, they will, but I just want to make sure it's double confirmed that they'll be here. And it's basically going to be a live podcast like we did in San Francisco or like we're doing now, but with people that are here. They can come to the office and hang out, and it'll be all about how to become a faster cyclocross racer with the pros. So it'll be pretty fun. So you can join us for that, and we'll have more details next week as we'll be getting right up to it. Nate, do you want to mention anything else?
Yep, we're still hiring developers, trainer.com/jobs. If you are a C# or Angular 2X web developer, or if you are an application, iOS, Android, Xamarin, we use Xamarin for our mobile app, desktop developer, WPF also, although we're moving all the Xamarin, that would be awesome. So trainer.com/jobs, and we do remote work, so you don't have to live in Reno.
Yeah, remote work, right?
Yeah, but we're only hiring in the U.S. just because of we've tried to go outside before, and there's like all these tax things. Yeah, the tax things are crazy. So people can get hit with a big tax bill unexpectedly, and it just raises the complication level. And there's the time zone issue. But even if you're in like the correct time zone, I could talk about it for hours. But sorry, U.S. only.
Awesome. So. Also, just another reminder for people, if you go into trainerroad.com and go to your profile, if you're a TrainerRoad user, and you go into Ride Sync, you can sync TrainerRoad to Garmin Connect and Strava, and we recommend doing so for some upcoming features that we have coming up. So go ahead and take care of that. I've already synced things, and I've been using some of these new features, and it's been awesome. Really
Good.
Exciting. So I think it's going to be something that's people are really going to enjoy. Before we get deep into the questions, this is more combining a bunch of questions that we had. And I guess it makes sense, right? It's start of the year, so a lot of people are looking at, or I should say it's almost the start of the year. They're looking at what events they're going to do next year. Mm-hmm. They're looking at how to plan it out. They're looking at what to do if they can't follow their plan with precision, all those questions. So we figured what we would do is kind of wrap it into a procedural step-by-step guide, more or less, of the things you should know and do in order to successfully plan and follow a year of training. Before we do that, though, I'm sure people are also wondering what events we're going to do. We get questions about that, so we'll add those in. But what are our main goals, or your main goals this year in terms of what you're racing for?
Should we define what a goal is?
Yeah, actually, let's do that first.
Yeah.
Good point, because there's different types of goals, right?
Yeah.
How would you define them?
Yeah, and let's also make clear that the first step in basically defining your season or planning your season starts with goal setting. Mm-hmm. Really, outside of having a goal, you can't do a whole lot.
That's true. I mean, otherwise you're just you gotta
have some goal, no matter how nebulous or specific. Something's got to be there to drive the work you're about to do.
Mm-hmm. I've got many goals at different levels. Number one goal, beat you two fools. No, but I mean, you're not fools. I'm just joking.
Yeah.
There's a lot of smack talking in the TrainerRoad office, like every single day.
Yes.
So if you hear me say it on the podcast, it's not because I hate these guys. It's just because it happens all the time and it bleeds over into this
friendly
event
banter.
Too. Yes.
Yeah, and we battered his ego to the point where it's his only recourse.
See? That's what I'm talking about. Okay. So, number one, beat you guys on the 40K TT that we're going to do.
Okay.
That's number one goal. Number two goal is a quote unquote good time at Leadville.
What are you shooting for on your time?
And I always forget. I think there's one that you're going to go for that I'm not going to do. That's sub 8.
Yeah, sub 8 is.
I think sub
ideally
9,
what
you get a
I'm
big
going
belt buckle, right?
for. Yeah.
And that's a big accomplishment.
Oh yeah, that's good.
So that is my second one. Those are like the two big ones. And if I had to pick 2 events to peak for, those would be the 2.
Okay.
Through the rest of them, I want to do well in mountain bike season. I want to do a bunch of road races, in the Reno series. Those aren't the things that I'm going to like taper for, but I still want to like do well. And then I want to have a great cross season in the fall too. Those are like the
Right.
big things. Yeah.
That makes sense. And I guess, my goals are pretty similar because we're doing a lot of the same events.
You want me to beat you in the 40K
No,
time
no,
trial?
That part, no. But in the sense that the events we're targeting, right? Chad, do yours differ?
Nope. With Leadville, probably the same. Sub 9 would be awesome.
That'd be great.
And then with 40K TT, I'm not really concerned with beating anybody so much as going under 50 minutes, which on this course, it's a slightly slower course from what I'm hearing. So that might be a bit lofty, but I'm still aiming for it.
Cool. So those are like what we just shared. Well, Nate, you shared some other stuff too, which we'll get into those sub goals really in a bit, but we shared outcome goals there.
Yep.
And those are usually big picture, large goals that are outside of our control.
I call them long-term goals.
Yep.
Yeah. And it sounds weird to say they're outside our control, but we can't just show up on race day and just will our way to beat somebody or to get a sub 9, right? We can do things that we're going to talk about to make that more likely.
Yeah, they're overarching. You can't just jump straight to them. You have to do a lot of things along the way.
Yeah, and just because you can't control that goal doesn't mean that you shouldn't have it. They're aspirational, and it should be something that we reach toward, right? And to get there, we might have smaller goals, which they're commonly referred to as like performance goals. And
or short-term goals.
Yep, and those performance goals or short-term goals, those aren't necessarily things that are perfectly under our control. They're more like intermediate outcomes. So, for example, let's take the 40K TT, right? So you want to beat us.
Yep.
So in order to do that, you're going to have some other goals that you want to hit before then. Like you'll probably want to go sub 55, or you might want to do some other things like that, right?
There are those, and hit a certain FTP, hit certain workouts in my TT position at certain wattages.
Process goals, all
right?
these. Yeah.
Yep.
That's where we're getting to process goals, and those things are fully under our control, right? That's
well,
something
no,
that we can
I think
do.
those are still outcome. A process goal would be, let's talk about those are still outcome because I
Okay.
still can't just will my way to get to do 360 watts for 20 minutes, right?
Right,
I can't just say that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I can change my behavior to make that much more likely to happen.
Yeah, I think we're getting a little confusing with the whole process versus outcome. I mean, outcome is something that happens. Process is something we can control. And it's for this reason that I like to see this as long-term goals, short-term goals, and process goals.
Yeah.
The long-term goal, you do the short-term goals to propel you toward the long-term goals. The process goals help you accomplish those short-term goals, which in turn move you closer to those long-term goals.
So let's talk about what is a process goal.
It comes down to something like a habit or behavior or an action that you're able to do repeatedly or something that's far within your control.
Yeah. So for me, what's in my control for process goal, I can use TrainerRoad, but I can try to hit 400 TSS a week, right?
Yeah.
That's in my control.
Yep.
And if I do that, and another thing that's process goal is I can eat my fruits and vegetables every day, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
right.
In terms of training, I mean, your training plan. Those are all your process goals right there.
Yep. So that's something where I can change my behavior, and if I do that every day, I should then hit my short-term goals, and thus be more likely to hit my long-term goals, or at least be more likely, because you can always set goals that are. I could say I want to win Kona, and I could do all the TSS I want, but it's not going to happen.
And we've talked about those pass or fail goals before. They're basically 100%. Completion or success rate or 0.
Where I find a lot of people, I guess, commit an error with goal setting is when you set an outcome goal or a long-term goal without having a process goal that actually sets you up for it.
Yep.
I see a lot of people do that, and it's not necessarily like it's more a sin of omission, I guess you would say, rather than commission. It's not like something they're actively avoiding those process goals, but if you have a big picture goal or a long-term goal, whatever it is, you have to break that down into small things that you can do, that you can control, those process goals that you can do every day to get to that.
Yeah,
if you don't, you find yourself a lot of the time up against it. You're like day before the event or week before or month before the event, and you're panicked. And
you have to follow through with the entire goal setting process, and that doesn't just mean assigning an a long-term goal and hoping for the best. You have to follow all those steps. It's really quite relevant, and it seems a bit cliche, and it seems like I have goals, I know what they are, but it has to be more specific and more. You have to really go after it. It has to be something you actually sit down and do.
Mm-hmm. It becomes a wish, right? Like, I dream of going sub 9 but unless you're doing the work to do it, it doesn't happen. Another thing, this is huge because started TrainerRoad, and the amount of work to start a new company. A lot of people want to start a company, and it's like a dream. But when I did all the first code for TrainerRoad, I'd wake up before I went to work. I'd wake up at 4 a.m., work until work started. At lunch, I would leave work. And then in the evening, I would work from after I got off until like 10, 11 o'clock at night. Then all weekend, I would work. Poor wife. But like those are the things, that's the behavior, right, that I could control. And I chose to do that every single day. Yeah. And then it made the success of TrainerRoad more likely. If I would just be like, I'm once a week, those
are actionable steps towards moving toward a goal, not just having a desire or a dream or a wish.
And it's the same as training, right? Like you can't, and you get close to it, you're like, I'm going to do it all at once. It doesn't work, right? I like the idea of, and I don't even know if I should share this with you guys, but I think that for a 40K TT, the race has already started. The race started for me about a month ago.
I think it started much longer ago.
No, that's when I went.
Since I said you'll never beat me, I think that's the moment it started.
That's true. That's a good point. Well, that's when the outcome goal was set.
That's when I got in Nate's head.
The flip switch in a good way. In a positive way.
Yeah.
But really, the race starts today, right? And all the stuff that I'm doing is actually going to have more. The stuff between now and May when we race is going to have a more influence on the outcome than anything I could do on race day, any taper I could do, any nutrition strategy. It's these next 5 months.
You bring up a good point, and this, I don't want to transition to this yet, but if I was if I was a radio guy, I'd be like rolling right into the next thing, because it's a good transition, because these goals, they fall on a calendar in almost every situation. Because if you don't put some type of a date on starting your company, for example, then it's tough to actually know when you need to put those process goals into place and make it happen. And just like we have the benefit of, usually if we pick an event, then that event has a date, and therefore it places usually urgency on our actions and getting those process goals in place so that we can actually make it happen.
Yeah, it starts to make you accountable.
Yeah, and I think that something, just to give people like a breakdown, and if you have a pen and paper, or if you want to write this down or type it into your phone or anything else right now, this is a basic breakdown. If you were to follow TrainerRoad's plans, this is what you would need in order to time everything right so that you would peak. Because like Nate said, you can't just train at the very end and make it happen. You have to start with enough time to be able to get there. We'll cover the contingencies in a bit, but if you're doing all of our cycling plans, it's 28 weeks, and that's from if you started with the first workout on today and then you worked your way all the way through, it would be 28 weeks of training, right? Mm-hmm. That would bring you through a base phase, a build phase, and a specialty phase, leaving you with peak fitness right there for that event. That's ideal. If you're doing a sprint distance triathlon, 16 weeks, Olympic distance triathlon, 20 weeks, half distance triathlon, 24 weeks, and a full distance triathlon, 28 weeks, just like the cycling plans that we have there. However, something that we should, and ideally your A race falls right at the end of that, right when you finish your specialty phase right there. But as we know, life
happens.
Life happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as simple as that usually. Whether you have excess time, whether you don't have enough time, or whether you get sick, or whether you travel, or get injured.
Or maybe you're not trying to peak for a single event. You're looking to be fit for a series of events, or to be fit multiple times over the course of a season or year.
So how do you want to cover this, Chad? From what angle first do you want to cover? Do you want to cover it one like A race versus multiple A race versus a whole race season?
That sounds good, yeah.
Okay, cool. So, Nate, you brought this up. I don't know if this was actually on the podcast or just in a discussion. They all feel the same. But you had mentioned the fact that you really like having fitness for a season, right? In certain genres, like for example, cyclocross, right? Like you're racing for a season, or if you're doing road racing, chances are there's not like a big road race like in mountain biking. There's Leadville or something like that.
There's a better analogy. So leading up to the 40K, or not, this is actually not an analogy. This is what's happening. Leading up to the 40K time trial, it's going to be mountain bike season in our area. So that one, my A race is 40K TT, and then I'll be mountain biking. Leading up to Leadville is going to be road race season. I'll be road racing. Then there's Leadville. But then after that, there's cross season. I have no peaking. I just want to be fit. I'm going to take a little bit down again, and then I want to be fit in the fall. So that's what you're talking about now is 2.5 months. I want to be fit. I'm going to do a lot of racing, hopefully.
How would you adjust a training plan, Chad? Let's just say that you get to a spot where you want to maintain fitness for a race season, let's say 8 weeks or so, like that. How would you adjust one of our plans to do that? Where would you add time on?
We're assuming you've moved through a base build specialty cycle and you're in the specialty, you've peaked. Yeah, we're just looking to maintain at that point. And a lot of the times racing handles a lot of that maintenance work. Outside of that, you just have to look, how complete is my racing relative to what I'm trying to maintain? And we've talked about how easy it is to maintain fitness that you've built, which, the building, of course, takes the bulk of the work. If your racing is sufficient, maybe you're getting a weekday practice race and then a weekend of racing, maybe a couple races, 3 races over the course of a weekend. That right there might be sufficient. So it's kind of a race and rest sort of approach. Otherwise, you have to look at where you're deficient. If you're just getting a single race on the weekends, then you probably got time for a couple maintenance workouts throughout the course of the week. But the key here is that you're not overly fatiguing yourself. You've built peak fitness. Now you just have to hold on to it. So you don't have to do a ton of work to do that. Again, something we've covered a lot. So just a lot of the time, the 7th and 8th week of the specialty phases are sufficient. Sometimes you can just look at the low volume plans and just pick the Tuesday, Thursday workouts, save yourself for the weekend racing, etc.
That's a great point. Yeah.
I like to always, though, even this is probably a bad thing, but I don't have I'm in the fall, I'm looking towards mountain bike racing in the spring the next time. So I kind of want to always build fitness. And I was thinking about using the specialty plans, moving it so if I'm always going to race on Saturdays for cross races, Friday would be the rest day. And maybe then if it's getting too much, I remove one of the really hard workouts, right? Maybe the hard workout after the race I remove. So I'm still kind of getting some of the quality. And I'm still
all tunable. These are things you should absolutely do.
So I'm really going through the specialty and doing the majority of the workouts, but I'm changing the rest day to be before my race.
Absolutely fine. And again, if this is something that works for you, that's what you would do. So even the recommendations I've made they aren't just for everybody. Will work in all cases.
It takes a lot of listening to your body, especially when you're racing frequently, I've found. Just because when you're racing frequently and it's putting high demands on that, and I know for us, we have travel with racing pretty regularly too.
They're all different forms of stress that are more noticeable and maybe a little less manageable once you endeavor into a racing season.
And I think if I had a different approach, because there's a cross series here where you can get points and you kind of try to win the series. If I was trying to win the series, I probably wouldn't be thinking about. I do that first approach you said, where I do kind of a less work to be really fresh for all those races. Know that I probably won't be as big a FTP come February for mountain bike season, but who cares? Because my goal is not that.
Those ebbs and flows are going to happen anyway. You can't be fit all the time.
I see a lot of people too, they have a race season like that, right? And they're trying to get points for that. And I usually, in most cases, wouldn't recommend, unless it's a really short, 4-week series or something. Even then it might be a little tough, but I usually don't recommend timing it so that you peak at race number 1, right? Because it's helpful sometimes to build into those things, because everybody might be refining their racecraft if it's early season. You can ease your way into it, and then
getting used to, once again, what it's like to race as someone else dictates. I mean, we do so much indoor training where it's entirely on our terms. I mean, the workouts are steering us, but we're still calling the shots. You get out on the road with any other number of racers, and they're not your shots to call anymore.
And I think it's the difference between, okay, I can prepare myself to see that this 1 minute hard interval is coming and outside. It's just random, right?
It happens.
And it takes mental fortitude to be able to be like, oh, there's a 1 minute at 200% or not 200%, but really high.
This is a bit off topic here. We're drifting off a bit, but I wanted to add to that. What I've found in those situations is that usually it's the mental fortitude that I need to grow, and I usually come to the conclusion that I had the fitness. I just wasn't psychologically ready or in one other way.
Yeah, totally.
But it's there. It's just that when it doesn't happen on my own terms, I have to not be fussy, and I just have to learn to,
it's a
deal
bit of a
with it.
shakeup when you get out there and you're confident in your fitness. You know how to suffer. I mean, anything they throw at you, you're going to be able to respond to. But actually responding to it can shake you up a bit.
Yeah, I think it's the best way to prepare to prepare the fitness you need to respond to that. But then, getting in those race minutes, so to speak, is really helpful.
Unless you're in a triathlon.
Yeah, true story.
Just go 40K TT.
Different situation.
Yeah. So what about multiple A races? You see this a lot with triathletes, but also with mountain bikers, for example. They might be doing the Epic Ride series, and those are separated by a couple months. Mm-hmm. Or you might be doing something where it's like you're preparing for an Ironman, but you have an Olympic or a half somewhere around there. We've talked about it once again. What Chad said, I really liked it in the sense that it's not this isn't just a one-size-fits-all approach in the sense that you can just follow it like that. It takes a lot of listening to your body. But the point is, if you have multiple races like that, you still want to prioritize them. Sure, they might be even, but I've found in most cases that it's rare to find that one race is exactly the same priority as another race for a person.
Yeah, even if you have a multi-peak season, those peaks are also prioritized. One of them is going to be more important than the other or the others.
That's what I've always found. It's pretty rare that it goes the other way around. And in that case, what you'll want to do, it's pretty simple, and I'll let you get into the specific recommendations, but when you time your fitness so that you're getting pretty darn fast, you're perhaps into a specialty phase for that first one, and then afterward, obviously, tone it down a bit, give yourself a quick reset, and then go back in. How would you mechanically do that, Chad, or recommend, I guess? And we can operate on ideals.
So you have to be realistic, and first off, understand that you're not going to be able to cram too many peaks into a single season. So if you really want to be in peak fitness and you really want to get everything right leading up to each of those peaks, there's going to have to be two, but you can maybe work in a third one if you're experienced and you can get away with actually peaking 3 times. I mean, it's arguable that you're peaking all 3 of those times. So I like the two peak, and I just see it in terms of, you have like a state level competition folding into a national level competition. And if you're at the higher end of things, maybe that folds into a world level competition. That's where that 3 peak sort of scenario might figure in. But in any case, between those peaks, there has to be a downturn of activity where you let your mind and your muscles, your body recuperate. And then basically you just re-ramp up, ideally building on a higher level of fitness than each preceding peak.
Yeah, that's the textbook way. A lot of times, triathletes, they'll have, maybe you'll do 2 Ironmans in a year, both trying to qualify for Kona, or you'll qualify for one to do Kona, but you'll sprinkle in halves and stuff like that to be able to because they're almost like, we call them tune-up races or something like that to feel the racing, all its equipment checked, is my nutrition right?
Confidence builder.
Yeah, and those are important, right, Chad?
Hugely important. Yeah. In fact, I feel like it's a big risk for a person to work toward a single A race and not do any racing in the interim.
Yeah, I notice every year that I'm more nervous on the line of race number 1 than I am for my peak event a lot of the time.
Yeah, and that's one thing that you kind of you tone down when you do a couple races or many races prior to those really important events.
It's a balance, right? Because if you race too much and you take too many tapers or stuff, you can I've seen that happen, right? People, they just race, and they end up not getting any more fit.
They almost race themselves out of fitness.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
And it usually doesn't just come with a downturn in fitness, but it comes with a big downturn psychologically speaking.
Yeah, hugely.
Because it's frustrating because you were once fast and then you're still racing, but it's dropping down.
Working so hard and everything's just kind of dissipating.
But then if you don't race, you have equipment problems. You you can't respond. Some of the handling stuff, the speed at which races are, like in a group, is a little bit different than on the road. I mean,
totally.
Than with friends.
Yeah, you have to strike that balance. And I've even had situations where I felt like and this is something that's really tricky. You have your events laid out and you do one and you do really well, and then you're like, there's another race next weekend. I wasn't planning on it, but I could go and win. I'll go do that one. And then you do more and more and more. And I found myself in one position. It was in 2015. I was doing really well, like a really good early season. And I actually had to stop and force myself to kind of take a rest. And because psychologically I was so motivated by the racing itself and the results from the race and my fitness going up that I was not going to be timing things appropriately according to my plan. I needed to stick to the process goals, right?
That is because in 2015, you were targeting nationals, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I would say if you just wanted to do well in the local race series, keep doing what you're doing,
Smash
right?
it, yeah.
If you're winning all of them, I wouldn't be like, oh, I'm going to, you know. But you had a bigger peak goal later on.
Yes, exactly right. So that's why, and once again, you had to be realistic with your priorities. And
this is why planning figures so heavily into this sort of thing, especially planning based on prior experience. So when I have a good preseason, I'm super motivated to do probably more racing than my body can handle. So I'm not going to let myself fall into this trap.
So how do you know, like, what's too much racing and what's too little racing?
That's a super good question and very subjective. So experimentation largely, and I know it sounds like a cop-out of an answer to say, we'll just go and find out, but that's basically what you have to do. I mean, this is one of those outcomes that you can't necessarily foresee. So you just kind of have to
experiment,
wing it a bit. I mean, do the training, but just kind of see how that race season is going to unfold, how much you can get away with, when you need to time your downturns, if you have to time them based on where your peaks are set. I mean, it gets pretty complex.
Our filmmaker, Dave Christensen, we mentioned him a lot on the podcast, incredibly fast racer, and he can race a lot, more than many other people I know. And so it will vary from person to person.
Could be argued he could race a little better if he would pluck out a few of those less substantial or consequential races.
Yeah, it's too though. It's fun, right? Racing's fun.
Absolutely, and he has a good time. I mean, I think largely he's driven by having fun. So makes sense for him to race a lot.
So let's talk about, let's say that you have this timeline laid out, right? You have your outcome goal or your long-term goal or your A race. It's all synonymous. You have that, and then you have the perfect amount of time laid out before your training plan. You have the time laid out before your training plan, and you realize that you have too little time. So basically, you don't have the 28 weeks you need to build all the way up in an ideal build. If you were to cut out a couple weeks, Chad, where would you prefer they cut that out? And we'll talk about this in the context of our plans, and hopefully we can.
It depends largely on the fitness or the experience of the rider. So if it's someone who's coming off of a season, they've already done a lot of their base work. Obviously, they can get away with trimming their base season. If it's a new rider or someone who's new to structured training, power-based training, that sort of thing, I think you start at the beginning and you see how far you get. That's just kind of how it goes. And then. Yeah, those are basically the two most common scenarios.
Yeah, and I see a lot of people ask that question, and it's also the same thing. Like, I guess we can get into too much time. Let's cover the other end of the spectrum. If you're to patch in some more time, where would you do that?
That opens it up quite a lot. So it all depends on the gap. I mean, big gaps, you can actually put in an entire season in some cases, do a base and a build and work towards a B priority event. In the case of just a couple weeks here and there, maybe you schedule a training camp of sorts, or maybe you recognize you're a little burnt and you take a week of easy, unstructured training. So it's pretty customizable.
Another thing we say a lot of times is we call them rebuilds. I don't like that. It's just what it really doing is just repeating the build
just
phase.
Revisiting build.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you can go through the same thing, or if you did general build before, you could do sustain build, or you got to switch up.
Diversify your portfolio.
That's a really common recommendation. So you have that peakish event or maybe peak event, and you have a little downturn enough to reinvigorate you mentally and physically, and then you just dive back into however much of a build you can accommodate, leading into probably another specialty.
In some places around the world, they don't have access to a lot of races, right?
Yeah.
You might not have that race to like the B race to peak for, and that's okay. You can just take your recovery week, enjoy it, come back, feel a lot fresher, be a lot stronger, and still go towards those big races.
Yeah. Can I cover it? It's just something really quick. You made me, I remembered something a good friend of mine did. Being a fireman, or firefighter, I should say, he didn't have time to be able to attend a lot of races because he was usually working on the weekends and everything else. He actually, bless his family's heart for this, but they would actually almost set up like simulation events for him in the sense that like he'd make a route and then he would have the neutral support he would need because he was preparing for Lotojaw, so a really long race in Utah that they do every year, 200-mile road race. So he would have like these they weren't 200 miles. He knew he didn't need to do that, but they were like 100-mile days or somewhere around there. And his family would be like, they'd more or less have an aid station for him and that sort of a thing. And he would play the game just like he was racing and do a good job. I'm sure it wasn't an exact simulation of a race, but there are things you can do even if you don't have races.
I think I'd find more motivation in something like that, knowing that someone was going to do that for me than an actual race.
I can set that up. I can get some guys. We'll do it today, Chad. 200 miles. Does that fun?
Yeah, I'm training for a 40K TT, so no.
We can set up a 40K TT.
Training for.
I think
I'll get there.
The key that you brought up is that accountability of having somebody helping you.
That's
I think
and that
really
support
helps.
system, that's unrivaled. I've never heard about people going to those extents. That's impressive.
That's pretty good, right?
It's pretty great. Yeah.
Another thing, You bring up another good point, though, is if you, for that peak event, it could just be a group ride.
Oh, yeah.
That's like a drop ride, and you really want to go well for.
It's however
Maybe
you define it.
It doesn't have to be a race.
Yeah, you and your friends are staying at an Airbnb in some really cool place, and you have a big few days of riding planned, whatever it is. And it doesn't have to be competitive. But you still don't want to be like I talk about this with mountain biking a lot too, because a lot of mountain bikers kind of is like, I'm out here on the trails, and why would I train? I don't need to do that. But I bring it up to them like, doesn't it suck, number one, being the guy that everybody's waiting for? Because then once you get up to the spot that everybody's waiting, they leave because they've been waiting for too long.
Exactly.
That's not fun for you. And then it's not fun to dread the climbs every time that you ride. It makes it much more enjoyable.
It doesn't have to be competitive. It doesn't have to be a race. I have a buddy who wants to follow the 2019 Tour de France course.
Oh, cool.
And it's looking like that may actually happen. You can bet I'm going to train to be very fit for that.
Yeah, there you go. So
I have another question.
yeah.
Is there, I know what the answer is, but is there anything special and magical about 28 exact weeks? Like, is someone's fitness going to be messed up at 29 or 27? Because it's a little arbitrary, right? Like, 28 weeks is a good amount of time.
Yep.
You could go a little more, a little less. We don't want to see is 52, 64 weeks where you just like build because people will burn out. Or we don't want to see like 13 weeks.
It's really just a summation of the base build specialty cycle. And I just landed on, for a number of reasons, a 12-week base period for most endeavors. You know, sprint, the triathlon has it's kind of its own animal. You get a little shorter with the base and builds depending on the duration of the event itself. You could still do full 28-week cycles for those if you wanted to. But a 12-week base followed by 8 weeks of building. Really, it's hard to build fitness for longer than a couple months.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I've found that at 8 weeks, you know, I'm really getting to the point where I'm like, I'm ready to start specializing this because I'm not sure how much higher I can climb up this mountain.
Yeah, and that's the idea, and time has borne that out.
Yeah.
And then as far as the specialty phase, that too is 8 weeks because again, I mean, you're refining fitness and trying to hang on to existing fitness. So over the course of 8 weeks, that's a delicate balance to walk or a tightrope to walk. And 8 weeks seems to work for most.
What about, Jonathan, in planning your season, like the idea of, I want to call them practice races? They're not really practice, but they're like show rehearsals. They're races that are similar to your A event, but maybe not your A event.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Like maybe, for example, I'm planning on doing a race. It's not going to be an A race, but let's just assume that it was. It's the True Grit. I think the True Grit 50. I think it's called in St. George, Utah. It's got a lot of technical terrain. So in a race like what you're talking about, it may not be the same distance. It may not be other similar variables, but maybe it's really technical and similar terrain. So I might want to emulate that. I think that's something that we haven't really talked about. We usually refer to our races as A, B, and C priority, whereas A, you know, like you said, maybe a couple A races a year, but it's really, you can just do one. That'd be great too. But then B races, usually those B races are ones that emulate a certain aspect of my A race. So then I can validate an approach or my fitness or something else with that race.
I think of it as A race, a big taper, and I'm not skipping it unless something bad happens. B race is just like a day taper or something like that, or 2 days, mini taper, and C is no. But I could say, like, I might have these mountain bike races be B races, although my A race is a 40K TT.
Yep.
But I was bringing up the point, too, like for Leadville, it's going to be a 100-mile mountain bike race. So we've signed up for
Tahoe Trail 100.
Yep, that's 100K.
Yep. So it's about 60 miles.
Roughly. That's at 7,000 feet. So we're trying to find an event that's close in elevation and it's long. And it's before Leadville, so we can kind of like see, you know, if we have a lot of problems finishing that, we better make it like some change in our training.
Yeah, and this is an interesting point. So Chad and I are doing that race to qualify as well for Leadville, but you are already in through the lottery, but you're still doing that race because it's good preparation.
And ideal experience.
Yeah, I would do it. I'm also doing it to get a good corral start, but I would do it anyways just for the experience. Because I say, man, these tires are not the tires I want, or man, I could have carried way more water. I should have had a backpack.
Right.
All right, my nutrition, I messed it totally up.
Yep. Exactly right.
These are things that you use these races to figure out. I mean, it's common sense.
Yeah.
And then we're also doing Carson City Off-Road.
Which is 50 miles.
Yep.
Which, are you guys doing the 50 this year?
No, Chad, we signed you up for 50.
Yes. Yes, I am.
Because really, we could do the 32 or the 50, but it's a better prep for Leadville to do
you
50.
guys have a good grasp on what our season looks like. So
year
looks like.
Yeah, and I think that's a good stair step, right, as we build up and for those events and once again we talk about this regularly. In terms of fitness, if you have a 100-mile race coming up, you don't have to do 100-mile training rides building up to it. What we're talking about is using these races to validate a certain part of your approach. And please note, they aren't 100-mile mountain bike races, right? Even though Leadville is. They're shorter, but they're similar in one aspect or another.
They allow us to figure out a lot of things, to see if our training is on track, to get our nutrition, hydration down, to see if we can deal with altitude, to see if we can deal with long days, to see a ton of things.
Comfort in the saddle,
Yep.
kit choice. Another for the 40K time trial, we have scheduled some shorter TTs from like 10 miles and above.
Yeah.
If I tell you what, if we are in a 10-mile TT and we can hold X watts, and that's it, we better not try to target that for our 40K TT, right? If your neck hurts for 10 miles, you better make some changes, right? How was your warm-up? For 40K TT, I'm going to practice different warm-ups and see which one I feel the best, right? So there's all these kind of things that you can lead up to help support your A race.
Yeah, exactly right. It's a good way to think of things that way. One last thing on this with Kona. Anybody that's getting ready for Kona, for example, or a race with extreme heat and humidity, you will want to do a race in the heat and humidity beforehand just to know how you measure
that's not just
things.
so you feel better about it. There are actual physiological adaptations that you will miss out on.
It's just so hot there.
We did a whole podcast about that, and you can look back. I'm not sure the episode number.
No, I don't have it offhand, but we actually titled it. You can see it has heat training in the title, and you can go through there.
But you don't have to, because a lot of people don't have access to a hot race.
Correct.
And a very common thing, I think probably the most common, if we're out and about, a listener will come up to me and say, it's like a racecation. It's I'm going to blah, blah, blah in Africa in February. And you can't do a hot race if they live in Canada, right? Like, unless they travel somewhere. So there's, you can do things to help adapt to heat without having to do the race. But I agree, doing a race in the heat too is better.
Very important. Yeah. So last two things to cover on like planning and adjusting your season, illness. And this obviously depends on the duration and the nature of the illness and everything else. Yeah. But in most cases, we recommend going back to where you left off if it's like a short amount of time.
In the case of a short-term issue, like a common cold or something that basically is you're over it inside of a week, maybe 10 days, you can probably just resume training where you left off without any real impact. Yeah. The caveat or the warning we always issue is that you ease back into training. Don't dive back into your hardest workout your first day back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll go back. I have the most experience here.
You
do.
And what I usually do is when I start coming back, I'll do like the easier rides in my plan, so the aerobic ones. Yeah. And I'll get through those until those feel a little bit better, and I'm stop feeling like horrible all the time. And then I'll pick like you said, the easier of the harder workouts. Mm-hmm. And then I always get sinus infections and stuff, and it really, I think for me, when I get sick, it's a month before I'm back. Like I lose a month of training, and then after 1 month, I can do the rides that I did before. But we
didn't talk about this in terms of the goal setting, but these obstacles will crop up. Just count on it. It's not an if, it's a when. So just know that they will happen. Hopefully they won't do early training to the tune of an entire month. But if they do, know that now your plan has been adjusted. It has to be.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of this comes, and then just apply the advice we've already spoken about on trimming your plan back where you need to. And I think that a lot of people are perhaps a little too, we touched on this, but too hard on themselves when they come back. I find that, be okay with making adjustments, turning down that intensity.
Don't try to make up for lost time. That's so common. It's like, I've been off the bike for 7 days, so I'm going to do my 3 hardest workouts, bam, 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 and get myself right back up on track. And that's so not how it works.
Yeah. What about business trips, vacation? Yeah. There's sometimes they're planned, and other times the boss says, we need you in Atlanta tomorrow. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with those with your training?
Yeah, you just roll with them, knowing that it's not going to sidetrack or set your training back in a super impactful way. It's just not. Short-term stuff like that isn't. So don't get too hung up on that. And secondly, just if at all possible, if you have any warning, you can kind of preload and maybe go into it with a little more fatigue than you go into a typical weekend. Mm-hmm. Just kind of get the hard stuff out of the way. Dose yourself with a big stimulus, knowing that you're going to rest and recover.
Yeah.
We also
I'm just depending on the nature of the trip, it may not be all that recuperative, but all things you have to factor in.
We also have a YouTube video on youtube.com/TrainerRoad, and it's about how to maintain your fitness while traveling.
Yep.
So if you have
Equipment
access,
tips and everything else that you could do, whether it's you bring your own bike
And that's the other.
or you work on a spin bike. We have a bunch of different tips on what you can do to keep it on track.
Yep. So then that's the other one is training over the course of that trip.
Yeah, one thing Chad said, just to hit home again, keep in mind the quality of recovery or what you'll be doing during that time off. Because
if you choose to preload or front load or whatever you want to call it. If you want to go into it carrying a bunch of fatigue, know that you're actually going to be able to dispense that fatigue over the course of the trip.
and then where do you go when you come back in to your training? So let's say let's call it a week, because I think a lot of trips
around
a
there.
week, right?
Pretty similar with illness. I mean, the longer the departure from training, you have to alter certain things. But again, most of these are short-lived. So we'll assume that it's 7, 8, maybe 10 days. Then you can just jump back in where you left off. And in this case, I would still recommend easing into it, but not with the same level of, I mean, you don't have to tone it down all that much. Maybe a single moderate ride, then dive back into the hard stuff.
I have my wife qualified for Boston, and so I'm going to be there for a week. Very proud of her. Before our 40K TT. But my approach to that is it's about a month before 40K TT we're going to go do it or go to Boston. And my plan is to big dose of training, maybe like 4 weeks. Yeah. And then I'm going to actually come back stronger when I get back from Boston.
Very
So you'll
probably.
have recovered. Is
Exactly.
that your intent?
Yeah.
And I'm actually probably going to do zero training that whole time because I want to enjoy the trip with my family. Yeah. But I'm going to come in with so that's just I'm bringing this up because it's a way for people to look at it. If it's a planned vacation or planned trip from a long time, and you do have a good build into it, you just time it with recovery week. And if it doesn't line up exactly with your plan, let's say it's like 5 weeks, Chad, couldn't someone just repeat one of their weeks and build?
Absolutely, yeah. The plans are flexible as always.
And then go ahead.
No, that's it.
And then take have that entire week be a mental break, which we're going to talk about in a second, which is really nice.
Yep.
And then I can come back and I can start doing my real specialty 40K TT on the trainer, simulating workouts.
Completely refreshed, ideally.
Yep.
Your initial couple of workouts will be a bit flat. That's to be expected, but you won't have cost yourself any real fitness.
Yeah, and I would argue, too, I could actually, by the time the 40K TT comes, because I'm refreshed with my mind, and I've taken my body, been refreshed a little bit, and I'm like kind of relaxed, and I'm gonna, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like I'll come back stronger.
A guy I raced with for years did exactly this. 4, 5, 6 weeks out, as early as 3 weeks out, even would take an entire week and just go fishing and just disconnect. And man, did he come back and just owned it.
And you say a guy raced, how many national championships does he have?
A couple, yeah.
Yeah, so he followed that approach and won national championships.
Yeah, and big stage races or performed well at all of these events.
Yeah.
So he obviously benefited from it. And this was a bit of trial and error. He knew it worked for him, so he had confidence going into it, and he structured his season accordingly. But I argue that it would work for just about anybody.
Let's use that to transition to the fatigue aspect of things in terms of psychological or physical fatigue. You don't usually see this in most cases if somebody's just building up to one A race. Where I usually see this is if somebody's trying to maintain over a season, or if they've run themselves a little thin in between peaks, right, and from one peak event to the next. Before we get into what you do for an adjustment, recognizing physical fatigue, it can be really tricky. There are so many red herrings that you could get thrown off on here. I've know it in certain times I've done a workout and it's just felt so extremely difficult, and in the end it was because I didn't calibrate my power meter beforehand, right? Or it's maybe something else, like for example, I ate really poorly the 2 days before that, or my sleep quality was adversely affected to a great degree, or plenty of things, just really stressed out.
Outside the bike.
Yeah. And there's so many different things that affect it that a lot of the time in my mind, I think my mind freaks out and goes, maybe you're training too much. But the fact is, it's pretty hard to get to that point where you're training too much if you're following a properly structured plan.
And if you're a non-pro.
Yes.
Right? Like, I think a lot of times on forums and everything, it's talked about overtraining and like chronic fatigue syndrome. Yeah. That's like, for us,
that's serious stuff there.
Yeah, that's serious stuff.
You have to really get after it to actually incur overtraining syndrome.
Yeah. But by us just saying that's serious stuff, there's somebody doing 2 workouts a week who's got sore legs and goes, hey, I'm overtraining.
Exactly.
Like I gotta back it off a little bit here. I've actually noticed a little bit of myself HTFU, just, hey, I'm tired today, but still doing the workout. And getting through it and being like, hey, that wasn't that hard,
right?
Exactly. Like my 28-year-old self would have been like, oh, I need to rest. And now I'm a little bit like tougher now than I was.
Just the possibility of overtraining gives everybody license to back things off a little too early.
Yep. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, and I think that, granted, if you are in a situation where you are fatigued and you keep pushing through, that can be rough. But once again, that's really tough to do if you're following a structured plan. Sure, it's
paying attention.
It matters to sickness, travel.
Yes.
It's
also
and
relative to
stress. I mean, it doesn't have to be like an overtly stressful week for you to feel a little bit flat. It can be this residual level that maybe just climbs or just hovers at a particular spot, and just grinds you down.
Yeah.
And before you know it, your workouts are a little lackluster, and you can't really pin it on anything. But it's just a combination of a lot of small things.
And we'll talk about this in a bit. A lot of people try to use heart rate to validate this. That's very problematic, and we'll get into that. Or they'll use different metrics to try to do that. In an ideal world, we do have something to measure recovery as accurately as we can measure work with a power meter. But we don't really have that yet. So let's just say that you are at a point. Let's just cover psychological fatigue, I guess, first, because I've experienced that where I just get to the point where it's like, man, I need to just take some time away from it. And that what I've found is that you can still maintain activity while allowing yourself to psychologically recover. And whether that's in the form of doing shorter workouts or less intense workouts, or maybe you're just on the bike and doing something else, or maybe you're totally off the bike, but you still are active, right? It's not like you're just completely sitting on the couch.
Yeah, it's important to recognize that, what that psychological fatigue stems from. Is it overdoing it physically? Or is it just a question of just burned out for a number of only psychological reasons?
And I think too, it's knowing what refreshes you.
Yes.
Right? Because
this is highly personal.
Exactly.
Figuring out what psychologically is going to reinvigorate you.
Let's go around the table and say, because I think by us telling our own experiences, people might make a connection and say, you know what, that does do it. And sometimes those little actions that you take personally, it totally makes you ready to go train again. Like you get that pull, like I want to go train.
Yep.
Jonathan, what refreshes you?
Three things. So if I'm feeling a little burned out, I usually just need long days on my mountain bike in the mountains. That's the one thing that I absolutely love.
And that seems different, right? Like, for a lot of people, it wouldn't be that.
Yeah, it's still on the bike, right? But it's something that I need. That's if I have a little bit of fatigue. If I have more substantial fatigue, I like to just get off the bike. And backcountry skiing is something that I usually use in the winter that I'm still really active, still extremely, physically difficult, but I find myself psychologically recharged after spending a week of doing that, maybe 2 weeks of doing that, and decreasing or just eliminating my time on the bike. It can really help me get recharged. And then the other thing is I have a sanctuary of sorts, and it's San Luis Obispo, California. So I love that place, and we can go there, and we have a good place to stay, and we can relax, and that's where I can reset completely. So those are kind of like my 3 tiers. That's like my fallback plans, if you will, if I have that. So
yeah, I don't have anything so specific. It's just really a departure from whatever it is that's burning me out. So if I'm just been racing a lot, training a lot, and I need to get away from that, it can come in 100 different forms. It's just a question of gaining departure from it and feeling eager to get back to it.
Mine, I actually have taken a playbook out of Coach Chad's book, and 2 things. One, even after if I train 6 days in a row, on that last day before the rest day, I will drink 2 IPAs, and Chad's turned me on to we're looking at the V8 like it's a IPA, but he has a V8 on the table.
I wish.
I don't have to drink much to get a good buzz on, but if I drink 2 IPAs, I feel really good, and it's relaxing. And my wife is actually she's handing me the beer. She's like, please drink,
please relax. Yeah.
And even in that little week, that little thing to relax, I'm and then 2, I do it before the rest day because the next day I'm not going to really be affected because I don't have to train.
Yeah.
And then I just did a 4-week block, and then I did a recovery week. It feels really good to know that instead of these intense workouts, every time I get on the bike, I'm doing something easy. If you follow me on Strava, Nate Pearson, Pearson, trying to get more followers than these guys. We're very competitive here. But I like to do Baxter, and that one is super easy. And if I have a good show to watch, that's so, because I don't have to watch a lot of TV only while I'm on the bike,
right.
And I can't do it when I'm doing really intense stuff. I highly recommend A Good Place. That's a really funny
Cool.
show. It's a new one.
That's
But
kinda funny.
anyways, doing that combined with drinking, like I look forward to every workout because I can. And then at night, not every night, but a couple times that week, I'll drink 2 IPAs.
Yeah.
It's such a I feel like I'm on vacation, but I'm also feel at the same time on my mind, you're doing the right thing for training because I'm still maintaining some aerobic
It's a
stuff.
hard-earned reward.
Yep. Every time I get off the bike, I'm like, that wasn't so hard.
Right.
And then I also got to watch a TV show, so I'm like, look forward to my workouts because I'm like, I get to watch this TV show that I really want to finish.
Yeah. What we're really doing, we're altering our psychology, but we're altering our perception during those workouts too. And it's amazing what that can do to change the quality and your motivation, the quality of workouts and your motivation.
Yeah.
Perception is subjective, and it's something that we can adjust in more ways than just what we're doing actively in the moment on the bike. Plenty of things to do that. I feel like that more or less covers everything that we would need. Do you guys have anything else that you would add in?
The only thing I want to talk about is that sometimes we talk about an off season, and I think personally I don't do an off season because I have built-in off seasons that annoy me.
They just happen.
Yeah, like work travel, illness. Like I'll travel for 2 weeks and then I'll get sick for 2 weeks. And I'll have like a month where I can't train,
Right.
and the whole time I get annoyed. Where other people, like a pro, they could be training 11 months solid and not miss a day.
Right.
Right. And then they do need
They
an
need
off
that
season.
time
Yeah,
off.
exactly.
But it's rare that us average Joes have
Yeah.
that level of consistency to require an off season. That said, like we just talked about with psychological fatigue, because in many cases for us average Joes, it's not like a physical need necessarily. Could be, but more often than not, it's a psychological need that we need for like that reset. So, you can follow those instructions and once again to your own tune on how to reset yourself psychologically.
I just want to say that you don't have to have an off season, right?
Yeah,
if you don't want it and you don't desire it, you don't have to have it. Like it's going to mess up your training because it's probably already built in.
Yep. And
Life.
I think the overarching principle with all of this is learn your body as you listen to your body, and that'll
Yeah, I don't
pay
even
dividends.
really look at it in terms of off season so much as transition phases. You have and it's kind of coaching ease, but whatever that is, maybe it's 2 weeks or it's 2 months, or maybe it's a week before you roll into that next season because you're super motivated. You like to mountain bike, then you like to road race, then you like to cross race, then you're back to mountain bike season. And one just rolls right into the other. Some people can sustain that and have a good time doing it the whole time.
Yeah, I've talked about this last podcast, but at the end of cross season, I'm like, and then on mountain bike, I'm so excited to race mountain bikes now. Yeah. And then I'm going to be so excited at the end of mountain bike season.
That variety
I'm gonna
is
be
exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. With that, guys, let's get into the questions. But hopefully, with that, honestly, we probably, when I went through this, I was referencing different questions, and I was referencing over 30 questions, and there were so many more than that
So we're done.
constantly come in.
Thanks for joining us.
Podcast over.
Let's get into...
Before we go into that,
yeah, please.
because we get a lot of questions asking about training plans.
Oh, yes.
We probably answered your question,
Yes.
but not your specific question, but in theory. So listen back to that. Next time you have a question, come back to this episode and listen to what we just said.
Yeah, a lot of principles covered there.
Exactly. It's
Yep.
the principles. So just apply those to your situation,
Yes.
and you're going to be good.
Episode 134. Imprint that. Then you can keep that in your head, right? The first question is from Jose Luis. He says, aren't sweet spot-based training plans, especially high volume, too intense for a base period? And I threw this one in because we get a handful of questions like this from a few different people. So we'll address that, and then we'll kind of address perhaps a misconception or a red herring that he's using in this case. He says, I've started training again after approximately a 3-week resting period. I needed more mental rest than physical, just like what we were talking about there. Nice. And I find this plan too demanding to start from scratch, he says. The first 3 days, I had an FTP test, and then I had a workout with a 0.82 IF, and then a 0.8 IF. He says, my heart rate is on the roof, and I haven't been able to even complete them. My concern is double. Is this intensity level good from the very beginning of the season? And if I gain fitness quickly with this intensity level, won't I lose it equally or just as quickly? So a few things that we can run through these that I recognize, but number one, the FTP test, we can cover that. And last week, we actually kind of gave you tips on an FTP test and on how to get the best result that you could with that. So that's in 133. We can cover that. Then we can cover in people's perspective on that, and then heart rate too. So wherever we want to jump in.
So
go ahead.
First question is he asked if it's too intense. It is more intense than a traditional approach where, you're doing, you're doing a ton of volume. And the intensity has to be low. The only way you're going to do a ton of volume is if the intensity is low. So with respect to traditional training, that's the only way I'd be able to see these as too intense. They're not too intense for your body to adapt to benefit from. I think you're struggling for something more than anything is that 3 weeks of rest. Coming back from 3 weeks of rest is hard. Doing an FTP test is hard anytime. The workouts that follow that FTP test are usually a bit demanding too. And there are adaptations that take place, largely plasma volume. There are certain things that happen over that detraining period that you have to rebound from. So it's going to take you a little while to get back up to where you were.
Yeah, something that I've noticed with this is a lot of people, if they just jump into this, if they're new to structured training, or if they just haven't done a lot of time in structured training, especially recently, it's very different from what you experience when you're just riding outside. Even with, even necessarily on some group rides, it can be, surgy every once in a while, but you have those times to rest, whether it's like the downhill spot or when the group kind of lets up sort of a thing.
He says he's started training again, so I'm going to assume he's been with us for a while.
Yep.
So he's hopefully accustomed to those sort of things. Yep. But I pin the high heart rate on just what I talked about with plasma volume. If you think of blood it's more viscous and it's more hard, less of it's carrying the nutrients necessary to the muscles being worked as hard as they were being worked, it's going to result in a higher heart rate. Not necessarily, I mean the power is going to be what it is. Your body's working harder to generate that same amount of power, which is one of the many reasons we don't train by heart rate.
Yeah.
To answer the question too of if you just did Geiger at 0.82 IF, which for an hour, and then Antelope for 0.8 IF for 90 minutes, they're hard, but they're not. Demanding. You should be able to finish those. Like right, they're not. I would say too. He said specifically high volume. Jose, like maybe high volume. Like high volume's only for very few riders, I think. Like to be able to,
relatively speaking.
Yeah, relatively speaking, for a small percentage of total riders, and it's much better to go start at a lower volume and then work into that, because even those easier rides are going to take its toll on you for the harder rides.
Yeah.
Those are long, demanding rides. I mean, that's the essence of a high volume.
It doesn't, and demanding doesn't necessarily mean that it's outside of the constraints that you should have within base. I think that there's a big misunderstanding that like a base period is just, it's easy work, and then you do the hard stuff later on, and it's not. It's something that's hard, and it should be hard, but it's a specific type of hard. Yeah. And I think that that's the hard thing for people to understand is there's a lot of hard in there. But that's the difficult thing to understand for people is the fact that even though this is base, it doesn't have to feel it shouldn't feel easy necessarily.
Not when it comes to sweet spot, especially.
The other thing, Jose, take your heart rate strap off.
I'm in the same boat, man.
It is in your brain right now.
Yeah.
It is so variable on so many things. And just what Chad said, for instance, when I am fresh, my heart rate can be very, very high. I can get it up to like indoor training 198.
Yeah.
And then when I am fatigued or when I'm farther through like a plan, it might only get to 170 for the same wattage output.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that I could now do like 30 watts higher. Like I physically can't get my heart rate up to 198 if I'm fatigued at all. But that also doesn't mean that then I need to always rest so that my heart rate can always get up that high. Because then if I do that, I will never increase my fitness because I'll work out like 1 day a week.
Yeah, it's so subjective from person to person, but then also within that person, there's so many factors that can affect your heart rate.
Yeah.
But then on top of that too, I usually like to call it a lagging subjective indicator of effort rather than power being an objective measure.
Let's also address that these workouts in particular, both Geiger and Antelope, are long intervals. So if you don't have that, just that muscular endurance or just the mental mindset necessary to get through these right now, fully understandable. So trim those down. And I don't mean change the workout in any way short of the occasional back pedal. If it's a 10-minute interval, maybe every 3 minutes, you give yourself just a 10, 20, maybe 30-second back pedal, or maybe you save it for 5, depending on how you feel. But you don't need to finish each one of these intervals run down to the point where the prospect of another one is truly intimidating.
And you'll be impressed, Jose, at how you're able to build that muscular endurance pretty quickly. Like you'll find yourself in short time being able
if you trained well prior to this and had a reasonably high level of fitness going into that 3-week hiatus, it's not going to take you too long to get back.
4 or 5 years ago, we used to get this question a lot more than we do today. So good job, everybody.
Yeah.
But people used to always say, my heart rate zones say this, and then when I'm training like sweet spot, my heart rate's too high. So should I be lowering my power so that my heart rate hits it? And our answer every time is no. Like just take you could, like I think with Jose, sometimes you look at I bet I could do a study too where you look at your heart rate, and if it seems high, you automatically think the interval is harder.
It affects your perception.
Yeah, I bet you I could have, because I've done, I feel like it doesn't do that, but if I went and Jonathan's doing an interval, and I told him that his heart rate was 20 beats higher, I bet you he would have a higher RPE.
Yeah.
And also I bet you if I reported back that the trainer or the power meter was somehow like reporting 20 watts higher and you couldn't get down like on a smart trainer, I bet you that would also, even though it was fake, I bet it would perceive increased
totally
effort.
I like to acquire the information, but I really don't like to look at it during the workout. I find it just distracting. It's usually a matter of I can't elevate my heart rate, or my heart rate's not falling as far as it should. Both, anytime, it just makes me question my fitness, my level of recovery. It just puts ideas in my head that I don't really need to be contemplating when I'm meeting the power requirements.
And it's just that. What I usually tell people is that when heart rate is bringing power into question, more often than not, mistakes are being made, right? And it's the fact that, especially if you have a structured plan, it's a solid workout, it's proper in its organization and for what you need to be doing, that's what you should follow. It's not that heart rate monitors belong in the trash, but it's that when you have power, it's a superior metric. Yeah. We're actually going to have kind of a deep dive on this because even though, like you said, Nate, we get less questions about it, we still get a good amount of questions, especially from those that are new users. We're going to have a deep dive on this on blog.trainerroad.com and on our YouTube channel and in the coming weeks. And you'll be able to check that out and hopefully it helps answer a lot of the questions people might have with this.
There were many years that we didn't have power meters, so heart rate was the way. So there's all these books, and people have made their career and a lot of money on heart rate. And we had a choice trainer when we started. We could have done heart rate based training the whole time. Or we chose power for a reason, and I think we made the right choice. Again, the video will explain everything, but it's just a superior metric.
It is.
And we're going to get hate mail. Jonathan at TrainerRoad.com.
Fire away.
Just, send all you want. I'm just kidding. Nate at TrainerRoad.com. You can send it to me too.
Or Chad.
Greg's question.
That was a little quiet. Chad.
That was really quiet. He put his hand over the mic and said that one. This one's from Greg. He says, "Hi guys. First, I'd like to share my improvement thus far with TrainerRoad. Recently completed in the Cape to Cape in Western Australia, a 4-day mountain bike stage race with legs typically around the 60 to 65 kilometer mark, with about 600 to 700 meters of elevation gain. This year I came in at 126 out of 1,600 riders in GC.
Wow.
Nice work, man. Up from 156 out of 1,100 riders in 2016.
Still respectable.
That is a massive percentage improvement that he has there.
500 more riders, and he moved
still
up 30
moved up 30
spots.
positions.
That's amazing.
Good job, man. I put this improvement down to solely TrainerRoad as other variables such as bike, health, weather were nearly the same.
I agree.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Of course we do, right?
Yep.
He says,
Good
anyway,
job.
to my question. I wish to get my wife onto my Tax Neo using TrainerRoad, but need some advice on how best to ease her into the rigors of indoor training. When he says this, I assume that's because she's either she doesn't have any experience with indoor training or she's newer to cycling, something like that. Not necessarily that, this isn't just a gender thing here. So just want to make that clear before we get further. Says, I especially need advice on how to approach her first FTP test. She competes in short course sprint triathlons every 2 to 3 weeks and clocks up to 1 to 2 outdoor rides a week for about 80 kilometers, plus a couple of runs and swim. So she's moderately fit. I'd say so if she's doing that. Definitely
moderately.
Fit. We're both in our early 40s. So let's take advantage of this as like an opportunity, I guess. Like let's talk more about the ideal ways to kind of help with an FTP test. But really more than anything outside of the test, we'll talk about the things that you want to have for an indoor setup, I guess, and pacing and that sort of a thing. Let's get into environment, I guess, first.
Do you want to talk about, the actual address, completing the FTP test itself, there's a lot of on-screen text. So I know this sounds like kind of a wait-and-see sort of approach. Yep. But once you get into the workout, I actually have done quite a lot of these with a lot of riders over the years, and I've refined that text to a point where I think I say the right things at the right time. So I'm hoping that'll help her get
really
through
good
it.
Point.
And I would suggest mentally the 8-minute test is a little bit easier.
Yes.
So I would have her do that. And then the last thing that might get you is, since you don't know our FTP, and we have the onboarding wizard, we underestimate your FTP so that the warm-up isn't too intense for somebody. But make sure, based on her weight, like she's not FTP higher than 2 watts per kilo.
Yes.
Like I'd go, or even no higher than that. If you're even, it's easier to start the warm-up a little bit easier than to have a harder warm-up, get all burnt out, and
Be
then
conservative with that warm-up, for sure.
The last thing I'm going to add that's specific to, I guess, an FTP test with this is if you're on a smart trainer, sometimes this can be difficult for people because they'll be in a really low gear or a really high gear when you start that testing interval. And during those test intervals, if you have a smart trainer, we switch that mode so that it's up to you to pace the effort, right? So you have to shift gears, you have to change cadence to pace yourself.
Yeah, and we keep saying if you have a smart trainer, we're talking about ergo mode.
Yes, good point.
And Greg does have a smart, he's a Tax Neo. So.
Yep. And in this case, what you'll want to do is you'll just want to be in, this is hard to guess for new riders, but roughly the gear you would be in if you were riding outside and trying to maintain that effort that you're going to maintain for that 8-minute interval. Because otherwise what can happen is that you'll go into that, let's say you're in your big ring and your tiny cog, and you'll go into that testing interval, and when it switches modes, it can feel like you hit a wall, versus if you're in that little ring and then you're in your big cog in the back, it'll feel like you just rode off a cliff and you're pedaling through the air. Yeah. So it's just less jarring, I guess.
Yeah, if you could be in the ideal gear at the beginning, that's ideal. Yes. But shifting, just know that for the first few seconds, like just shift in the right gear, you'll be fine. Your test won't be messed up. Just go through it.
Yeah. Totally okay.
If you're dancing around the gears a bit in the opening 15, 20 seconds, it's not going to derail your test.
Not at all. So let's get into like the things that you would want to have to make indoor training more comfortable. And we've gone through a lot of these items before. We have a winter training guide that we talk on blog.trainerroad.com where you can see a lot of different things that we recommend and link to. But we should talk about the different things that we have surrounding us and that we're on to make us more, I guess, comfortable or to make us perform better when we're training indoors.
Number one thing, great fan.
Yeah.
Do you remember the Lasco?
Yeah, Lasco Performance Series. And I'm actually, I kind of threw Keegan Swenson, he's a pro mountain biker, I kind of threw him under the bus and had him test one for us to see if this one was going to be better. And so the one that we've recommended, and you can find the links for it, is the Performance, and it's the pivoting utility fan, or sometimes they call it they've called it another name, but if you look up on Amazon, they call it the pivoting utility fan. But I had him try the one called the Lasco Pro Performance Blower Fan, and it's the 4900 model. It's actually a taller rectangle because I figured, when we're on our bikes, we're kind of like a tall rectangle, so that would put more air over us. And it's really powerful, the same amount of power as the other one, and it's really effective. He said that it's probably going to help with his hair loss.
Both those fans are winners.
Yeah, are you sure that I think it's it's funny.
Yeah,
I don't think it's the same CFMs because I own both of those fans.
You do?
Yeah, and I actually love that model there, and I think they're different, but I think you can't go wrong with any of those directional ones.
They're very strong.
Yeah, but I actually have 2 of them pointed towards me, and that's the number one. But 2 is actually better than 1, and I love having 2 of them, and I never want to go away from having 2 of those fans, and I feel it's enough. 3 would be overkill.
Yeah, and what we're really getting at here is we're trying to move more air over the surface area of your body, because when you're riding outside, every bit of your body is having that or has that going on.
Yeah, the less of your resources your body has to dedicate to thermal regulation or cooling your body, the more it can dedicate to turning those pedals.
And so that's our all number one thing, right? First.
Yes.
Yeah,
and one thing on this, I've seen people like do a fan in front and a fan in back. And usually what happens is you get like caught in this weird convergence zone where the fans are like canceling each other out, and you're just kind of
don't do that.
You're in no man's land. So when you have 2 fans, Nate, where do you have them positioned?
I have them on either side of my front wheel. So they're not actually in front of me. They're on kind of up and to the right, up and to the left, or other way around.
They're kind of blowing up your legs almost and up your body to cover more surface area.
Hit your torso.
Yeah, they're hitting my when my legs or when my knee's kind of in the 12 o'clock position, it hits my knee a little bit, but then it goes up and hits my body directly, and then I can feel it go up over my head, behind my neck. That's a huge spot, and over my head.
Probably gives you great hair, too.
Oh, dude, it's wonderful. Not as good as yours.
So fans are key. Another thing that I think you 2 use, or do you have a number 2 picked out? Okay,
Number 2.
Go ahead.
The number 2 thing that you should do is bring your entertainment. TrainerRoad, we are not an entertainment company. I think they are, and I'm like so strong on this. There are such great things in the world for entertainment, like movie studios, Spotify, like
Hollywood,
podcast,
Spotify,
billions of dollars
bike
spent
racing on Red Bull TV, on
Yeah,
NBC Gold,
YouTube,
Music.
music, right? So there's all of these things for entertainment, and sometimes people start out and they just silent room. They look at the TrainerRoad workout with text, and they look at it and they go, "Oh, that's a little bit boring." Yeah, we understand.
It makes me sad. That sounds like such a drag.
And we intentionally left that out because we want to be focused on making you faster, and we think that how you like to be entertained best.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like watching motocross might be fun for Jonathan.
Exactly.
I might find that really boring.
Yep.
Some people like watching the NFL. Somebody else might not like that at all. So bring your own. If you have a fan and some kind of entertainment while you're doing TrainerRoad workouts, you're like 95% of the way there for indoor training.
Let's be clear, this isn't about distraction. We're trying to stoke motivation here. It's
Exactly.
really that simple.
That's it. And it's because, once again, I mean, we're talking about it's a focused training tool. You're a type A driven athlete. If you're the type of person that's willing to do structured work, you understand that hard work pays off. You know that, and you know that being focused on a goal is something that makes you faster, right? So once again, just hitting that home. It's not about distracting you from the reality or from your goals. We want you to be focused on them.
And there's different levels of intensity. I've said this before. I'm going to say it one more time. There's the aerobic rides where I can watch like a drama or any kind of movie. There's sweet spot rides where I can watch things like I just watched Dunkirk. Like that is an intense movie. I can watch like movies that really like engage me. And then when I get anything above that, I start watching like first person footage, mountain bike race footage, cross races, Tour de France.
With music usually.
No, I listen to that, and then what I'll do is during the interval, depending on how long the interval is, like if it's 10 minutes at threshold, I have this switching point where I'm like, I don't need it. 2 minutes from the end, boom, I put on like a playlist that's really loud music.
Yeah.
And I usually still try to have the visual going.
Yep.
And then the next time I'm like, okay, like 2:15 left, right? And I kind of like we talked about a little bit with how bad do you want it, but it pushes me through the last minute of it, where if I listen to just music the whole time, I don't think I'd get that same psychological response that I do of, this is hard now, it's go time. Let's do this.
Yeah, and this will be good because I think that we're all kind of different on this.
Hence is why we don't like dictate your entertainment.
Exactly. I'm music only, right? And occasionally I'll bring something up. Usually it's during a less intense workout. But at the same time, what I've actually tried to do over the past year or so is the music is what I need for entertainment. It helps me with motivation and focus as well and everything else. But what I try to do is I really try to control my thoughts and my headspace during workouts like that, because I've found that it does a really good job. I can train myself mentally during those intervals to then I basically feel like when I'm in the race mode, I know exactly what to do when I feel like this. This headspace is familiar for me, and I can control it. So, but that said, if it's like a lower intensity workout, I usually watch Red Bull TV's coverage of cross racing or of cross country mountain bike racing. Or I'll watch, like you said, Supercross or motocross on TV. I watch that pretty regularly.
Yeah, I kind of divide it. So my Mason-Dixon line is basically between right at sweet spot. So sometimes sweet spot can go either way, music or video. But anything that's lower in intensity, it's video or something of that nature, something I could watch. And the more intellectually engaging, the better. I find subtitles work a lot. Subtitles keep me really trained on the movie, and the time flies by.
Narcos.
Yeah.
Anything. And I can work on my Spanish, which is super cool too. Oh, no, that's real.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And then anything above that, anything high intensity, it's always music, but I tone the volume down in the recovery so they feel like recovery and so I can disengage.
I do the same thing, by the way.
Intervals.
Work intervals up in volume, rest intervals I'm down in volume.
Exactly. Got to give your brain a break.
The other thing, like I think there's like striped or some workouts that have really big anaerobic efforts with a lot of rest.
Yeah.
I'll watch. It takes forever to watch a TV show, but during the rest period, it's like 5 minutes. I'll watch a TV show, and then 30 seconds before I pause it, get my music up, start at like 10 minutes before, and it's only 30 seconds of work, but I'm like, bam, hitting the music, and then I go back to a TV show.
I'll actually script soundtracks for workouts that involve really high intensity short punches like that.
And I know a lot of people are going to be asking, like, why don't you share those scripted playlists? Because the fact is, and we have some playlists, but the thing is, everybody likes different music.
Yeah.
Like for me,
Well, it's
VO2
problematic.
intervals, Rage Against the Machine all day. It's fantastic, right? It's great. Or like electronic music, whatever it might be. But some other guy might really hate that.
No,
so.
in my bike classes, and this is only 8 riders, 7 other than me. So 7 other riders, and I would put together soundtracks, and they'd be timed out, and they'd be the right music for the right type of interval. But undoubtedly, there were 1, sometimes 2 people who would complain about the music every workout. So
Yeah.
That is why there are a bajillion Spotify
Exactly.
playlists and options and
And we
stuff
leave
like
it
that.
up to you.
Yeah.
So, okay. And like
I
you
feel
said,
better because I get
those
that
two-
off my chest.
Those 2 things, you're in a good place. Let's talk about the trainer really quick. We've talked about this before, but if you have like a lower, like a mag trainer, in most cases, mag trainers don't have the best feel. They kind of feel like you're constantly pedaling through mud. If you can get like a kinetic road machine for like a standard non-smart trainer, they have a really good feel. That can be helpful. Only set of rollers that I would recommend are the Elite Quick Motions. Otherwise, they just don't give you enough resistance and they're way too loud.
and she's on a Neo. We've had good experience with those, yeah.
Yep.
Neo's good.
Yep, solid trainer. And if you go to a smart trainer, we've talked about the ones that we recommend: the Neo, the Hammer,
Kicker.
the Kicker. Those are good ones. Other than that, you can when you get, I guess, into lower cost smart trainers. Once again, you're getting into a bad feeling smart trainer that will control your resistance. So it's kind of tricky there. Other than that, what other things do you have around you?
The next thing, I call this a luxury.
Okay.
I have 2 luxury things. One is I have the Wahoo desk.
At first, when I saw that desk, I remember thinking like, this seems like an overbuilt solution. But then once you use them, they're pretty handy.
Pretty functional.
It's expensive,
It is.
but I mean, I
handy.
use it every single ride, and I'm always happy to have it. And I line up, like, if it's a long ride, I have like 5 water bottles, and I have some food and a remote and
That's
my
nice.
iPad and my iPhone. And there's other options. You can just get a piece of furniture.
Ironing board,
Yeah, there's
put it on a shelf.
some people use music stands.
Yep.
As long as you can hold like an iPad or whatever you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a little 12 by 12 butcher block. It's basically I think 4 baskets and then a butcher block on top. Computer goes on top, and then those baskets can hold any number of things.
Oh, cool. That's a good tip.
The last thing is, I forget the actual name of it, but a user sent it in to me, is that remote control for the power outlet.
Love that thing.
Oh my goodness, I'm in love with it because I start every workout without the fans on, and I
It's like
push a button.
$9, and it has totally changed my pre-workout or my early workout routine.
Yeah.
You can it's like
If you
outlet remote control. Search for that
If
on
you look
Amazon.
at that on Amazon, you'll find it. Yeah.
Cheap, and it works perfectly.
Something else that to hold your device. If you're using a computer, I see a lot of people using a computer. You don't have to use a computer with TrainerRoad.
Nope.
You can use your mobile device.
And I actually recommend the mobile devices. That's where the desktop apps are going to get refreshed with the mobile code fairly recently. We're waiting for something, but the latest stuff is on the mobile device.
Yeah. So I would recommend using that. And we have on blog.trainerroad.com, you can see we have a little walkthrough on how to make a phone case. And you can just do that with things that you can buy on Amazon. It's like $10.
My
So
wife uses a quad lock.
Quad lock is another
Yep.
one that you
And
can do.
She just pops her case off and it pops in.
Super
and
easy.
She used to, I don't know why I let her do this for so long, but she had her phone back and to the right on a table, and she would look at it while she's riding. And I saw her doing it one day. I was like, why don't we just get you a little case to put on?
Yeah.
And because we don't have enough room in the room that she trains to have something in front.
Like
You know
a
what I mean?
computer or something like that.
Yeah,
in
right.
front.
Like there's a TV far away.
Yeah.
And then you couldn't walk through the room if we put a desk there. So
Makes sense. Anything else that I guess that one thing, if you can, don't be right underneath a heater vent or anything else like that. Try to make it so that the room is more or less is a cool room if you can have that.
I am very lucky, as in our new office. Whoever built this put a sliding glass door exactly where my bike is, so I can actually open it in the winter, and I can turn on the fans, and I can get the room pretty cold.
Yeah. Brandon does that same thing.
Yeah, having that cold airflow over you when you're really hot is really nice, and then be able to close it when I need to without having to get off the bike.
Well, one thing we haven't covered yet is we talked about shorter workouts. And if you follow a training plan, the shortest workouts typically are 60 minutes. Doesn't mean you have to do 60-minute workouts. Most workouts in general, and as I move forward, all workouts will have a 45 or even a 30-minute version. So if you're super new to it and you want to really ease into it, your first couple workouts don't have to be hour-long workouts.
Yep.
Oh yeah, that's a good point, right? So for Greg's wife, yeah, just usually it's a minus version, right?
It's usually minus something.
Yeah.
That's an approach that my brother actually used when he first started training indoors.
It's good for super time-constrained riders too.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely is. And it was a good way to kind of break him into it. And then after a while, he's like, I'm good with 60s. I'm good with 90s.
Yeah. You'd be surprised. I used to, the idea of a 2-hour trainer ride, I don't know, a year ago was just not happening.
Yeah.
But I started doing hour 15 rides, then hour 30 rides. Next thing you know, I'm doing 2-hour rides. And it's just like, these are not so bad.
Same thing. Like 90s now are easy.
Yeah.
2 hours, not bad at all. And 60 minutes seems like, whoa,
Yep.
that was fast.
Yep. I think a lot of it has to do with goals, focus, motivation, and the proper environment.
And the entertainment is
And entertainment.
I could watch A Good Place like just all day long. It's so funny.
Jeremy's
The Good
question.
Place.
Sorry.
Is it called The Good
The
Place?
Good Place,
Yeah, okay.
The
Yeah,
Good
I've seen a
Place.
couple episodes.
Gotcha.
Pretty funny.
Jeremy says, so much debate out there regarding tubeless versus tubed tires. So he's talking about clinchers on the road out there. I've been hearing so many great things from roadies that tubeless is great. However, there are the naysayers. I'm a competitive triathlete and plan on racing my next half Ironman with tubeless and a can of goop to help eliminate the risk of having to stop for a flat because that is the major X factor in the race. Can you guys discuss the pros and cons of tubeless and if my plan sounds legit? I'm planning on tubeless this weekend, so I have zero experience at the time of this question. I doubt you will get this before I swap it out.
Yeah. This is like there were naysayers about index shifting and
Disc brakes.
Still today. Time trial, bikes.
Yes. Helmets, period.
Helmets, yeah. Aero bikes.
Yeah.
Tubeless is superior, sorry.
Yes, it is. And let's just, I guess the three options you have are you have a standard clincher with a tube, you have tubulars, and then you have tubeless. Mm-hmm. Tubeless is very similar to a clincher in the sense that it uses a rim that actually has tall walls on the side. It doesn't have to be a tubeless-specific tire and a tubeless-specific rim, but I would absolutely recommend that because otherwise you're going to get constant weeping, and you aren't guaranteed to have a very good seal against that bead, and that can be very dangerous. So
let's talk for people who
go right with it.
Don't know about tubeless. How do you set it up? And so this one thing is it can be really hard your first time.
Yeah, and depending on the wheel you have or the tire you have, it can
really
be hard always.
Yeah.
So basically, with a clincher tire, a clincher is set up so that the rim clinches down onto the tubes or on the tire's bead, right? There's a tube inside of there, and that's what provides the inflation. The rim usually has hooks on it, and the tire has hooks, and they kind of interlock. That's how they clinch together, right? The problem with running tubes is not only do you get punctures all the time in a tube, but you get a friction layer between that tire and that tube. And granted, they've tried to design tires with that in mind, but it basically creates a friction layer, which adds more rolling resistance and can also reduce tire feel a lot and make it, you'll be surprised when you go to a good tubeless tire and wheel setup how much better, more comfortable you feel when you turn. So tubeless is basically a rim. They usually don't have the hooks, or the hooks aren't quite as severe on the rim and the tire. They just kind of press against each other. There's no tube inside. Instead, what you do is you actually just fill the tube or fill that tire with a bit of sealant. Doesn't have to be a whole lot, and it's latex sealant. This isn't like slime that you buy from Walmart or you bought from Walmart. I think Slime has their own latex sealant now, but it's latex sealant. So Stan's, Orange Seal, those are the main well-known brands. You can make your own sealant. There are tutorials on the internet for that, but I just recommend getting Stan's or Orange Seal. You can get that and you put that in, and this latex sealant is amazing. I've ridden over nails before, and it's sealed up a whole entire nail hole. It's impressive stuff. It's really helpful. So that's kind of how tubeless works. And the benefit is you don't have that friction layer, and then you also have something that can seal pretty regularly. Tubular, on the other side of things, which that's a more like that's been in racing for a long time, and it's still used at the highest levels, and it does have certain benefits, but it has a lot of drawbacks. The rim doesn't have tall walls. It's kind of just like a dished rim, and then your tire actually has fabric sewn onto the base of that tire with a tube inside of that tubular tire, and then you glue that on to the rim surface. The downside with that is it's a total pain to glue tubulars. And then the cost, a tubular tire is very expensive.
Should you puncture it, replacing and regluing.
And then carrying
it's a laborious,
So if you get
laborious way to go.
And carrying a spare tubular with you is not exactly the easiest thing. It's not like it just stows really easily. It's a big mess there.
If you get a flat with a tubular, how do you replace it?
You replace the tubular. Or,
actually pry it off the wheel and probably, in case of a race, put another one on without glue.
Which is tricky. And a lot of the time what they'll do is they'll have these they basically have like an adhesive on there, but it does not hold as well. And that is terrifying to me to think that my tire could roll off That's terrifying. Now, the benefits of tubulars is the fact that a lot of the time what they can do, since they make the whole tire and the tube and everything else, they can make them to be a pretty supple design, so it can be pretty good for rolling resistance. The other thing with that is you can usually run lower pressure because it doesn't have those tall walls that can act as a pinching device for your tube. So you can usually run low pressure.
And they love them in cross. Right?
Yeah, and part of that is because cross is very much steeped in tradition.
Yeah.
Right? Let's be honest with that. But the other part is they can run extremely low pressure, which is helpful in cross because you can maintain more.
Which is the
momentum.
issue with tubeless, right? When you run low pressure, you risk burping the tire.
Yes, you do, and that.
But not as much.
Not as much.
Yeah.
So it's getting better as time goes on because they're designing tubeless tires and they're designing tubeless rims to be better. You'll notice that rims are getting wider and wider, and that's really helping tires not burp quite as much. And what burp is basically if you put a lot of lateral force on that tire, it leans and then it lets air and sealant out. Kind of it shoots out, and then it'll seal back up, but it drops that pressure. And in some cases, if it's a severe burp, like Bryce, our producer over here, he sends it really hard on mountain bikes all the time. So he's probably burped a tire to the point where it's just completely flat or
Well, you
almost
said
off
that
the
this
rim.
is more prevalent with aluminum rims too.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing, and I think it's just because there's more R&D being put into carbon rims in the sense that those are like that's where the money goes and that's where the development is going. For example, on our specialized Crux cross bikes, we have some DT Swiss. I can't remember which wheels they are. They are terrible for burping, and then they're also terrible for putting the tire on. It's really hard in getting it to seal. So
One tip on that is you can use Windex
yeah,
to help like get the tire on.
yeah. The only issue with that is that sometimes that can affect the quality of the sealant. So basically, like the sealant can be affected by the chemicals in the Windex. So they can be tricky, and getting it to seal can be tricky. So some tips on installation really quick with this.
Before we move on, the one reason too, pros using tubulars, they can just give their bike to a mechanic.
Exactly,
And they give them
right.
a fresh wheel.
Yes.
And they worry about nothing.
Us average
So-
Joes, on the other hand.
Yeah. All the downsides, they're like someone else handles that.
And gluing a tire is quite a skill.
Yes,
So
it is.
It's not for
It
winging
just
it.
scares me.
Yes.
Like a glued tire, like
Could peel off.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not comfortable. So if you're installing tubeless, some tips. First of all, get an air compressor or an air shot, something like that. And an air shot is basically like a store air canister, and that you pump up with your bike pump, then you switch a valve and it lets all the air in really rapidly. Some bike pumps have it built in, like Bontrager makes one. Or use just an air compressor, because what you need to do is usually a tube helps push that tire onto the bead of the rim. But in this case, since you don't have the tube doing that, that air can leak out if the tire isn't really sealed well. So you need to hit it with a blast of air to really pop it on. So use something that has high air pressure, and then something that if it's a really stubborn tire, I recommend using a heat gun on that tire. And that's something that a lot of people say it's overkill, but I've had situations where I'm in the cold garage and my tires are really cold and they're not flexible and they don't like to pop on or move or flex. And if you can just get it hot with a heat gun and put that thing on there, like the tire's hot to the touch, it'll pop on so easily.
at Grinduro, mechanic was having problems when I had the wrong size tire on and it was rubbing. He just put it in the sun.
Yep.
Like let it sit in the direct sun for a little while. It was even a cold day, and it was enough to like.
The race had started, by the way. So we're sitting there waiting for the sun to heat up the tire so we can start the race.
Seems so primitive, right? Yeah, so the sun
It wasn't
can heat it
a
up.
timed section though, so we're fine.
True. Good point. So that kind of covers, I guess, that. And on road, I think so. I feel tubeless is best. Just when you weigh all the pros and cons. If I had people that were changing wheels for me constantly and everything else, I might choose tubulars, right? Yeah. And even then, in some tubulars, you can remove the valve core and put in some sealant. I know some guys are doing that. But Nino Schurter, he's running tubeless now, and he's the best mountain biker in the world who was running tubulars forever, right? And now he's running tubeless. And a part of that is because the money in tire development, R&D, is going toward tubeless tires. It's not going toward tubulars anymore. It's going toward the things that people are actually buying, which are tubeless tires.
A couple things that I didn't know about before too is it requires a tubeless valve core. So you buy these things, and it's like it's just the core, and it goes through your rim, and that's replaces the valve core that would be on the tube.
Yes, you need a lock nut that goes on the outside of that valve core to make sure it's snug.
Yeah. Normally on tubes, it's not cool to have that lock nut on, right?
Yeah.
And
you
it's
don't need it.
but on tubeless, you have to have it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Otherwise, you'll constantly get a leak.
The other thing is these pros on like the mountain stages where they get a flat and they lose time,
Yeah.
Man, if they had tubeless,
I know.
like, and it's sealed up quickly, depending on the amount of cut. But a lot of times, after the ride, you'll look at it and you'll be like, oh, I got saved 4 times.
I can't believe it's sealed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they could it could change Tour de France wins if they would.
Totally.
And a lot of it is as fast or faster than a lot of for rolling resistance.
Yes.
Than with a latex tube. And I don't even think in the Tour they're even using latex tubes. They're using butyl tubes. So over butyl tubes, it's usually faster.
And in most cases in the Tour, they're using tubulars, and they're using that. But even then, man, I don't know why they're not putting sealant in that. And if that's the problem, I think that they should just switch over to tubeless, man. It'd be much better.
Tradition, man.
The one thing I can say is that tubeless tires are more expensive right now than a standard clincher, so that's a barrier.
Have they already started to come down, though?
They have, yeah. And there's more choice now, but it's still not to the same level of what you have with the rest of it. So you're like the Specialized S-Works Turbo tubeless is a fantastic tire. It rolls really well, and it grips incredibly well. And then if you have sealant in there, it's pretty sweet.
It's $100.
It's not cheap.
Not cheap.
So let's go into the last question. So from Matthew, he says, the podcast is amazing. I've learned so much listening to all the episodes. I'm in the beginning of low volume sweet spot base 1. I really find that the trainer workouts have helped me improve my fitness and also has helped me develop a better pedaling technique. Good to hear it, man.
Nice.
So my question is this. In the first week of February, I will be visiting my parents in the Tucson area. I have a desire to ride up Mount Lemmon while I'm there. I have that same desire. I've wanted to do it so many times.
Here.
Me too.
Yeah, it'd be a cool climb.
That's where my girlfriend's mother lives, and I still haven't ridden Mount Lemmon.
Yeah, I want to do it. So from looking on Strava, it's about 20 miles, 5,000 feet of climbing at a 5% grade. What percent of my FTP should I plan to ride it at? I figure it might take me about 2-ish hours for the effort. So let's cover that question before we get any further.
Yeah, probably in the ballpark of 0.85. That's where we cap the workouts, and given these are indoor workouts, so the outdoor may translate to slightly higher intensity, given that you might have little rests here and there. But I think 0.85 is a pretty good ballpark, real small ballpark.
And it's good to start out at 0.85, even if you could do 0.9 and then kind of pick it up as you go up.
Yep.
And your elevation is going to change. So as you get higher, it's actually going to get harder at that same intensity.
Yes,
so
it will.
So maybe an even pacing will actually give you a little bit of negative.
Especially depending on where you're coming from. If you're coming from sea level, it's going to be even more prevalent or obvious.
Yeah, absolutely is. He says, also, I often hear about not going into the red, and I'm using quotes, into the red too soon on a long effort. Is the red, in quotes once again, based on a percentage of FTP or heart rate? Also, how long is too long in the red? Many thanks. Keep up the excellent job with the podcast, Matthew. I hear this. I'm hearing Phil and Paul say going into the red, right? I hear it all the time on TV broadcasts. What is it?
I've heard this termed your glycogen budget. So basically, this is just a less renewable resource than your aerobic resources. So anytime you work hard enough that you're really blowing through the sugar, I mean, if you're metabolizing it aerobically, you're getting a lot of mileage out of it in terms of ATP production, energy production. You start metabolizing it aerobically, it comes a lot quicker, but it comes at a much greater cost. And then these muscle stores, the glycogen in your muscles, the glucose in your bloodstream, and even the glucose that you're eating, the exogenous, what's coming into the system, can't necessarily keep up with the rate at which you're spending it. So you have a very specific budget, and if you blow through that budget quickly, basically you're going to have to go slower at some point. You're not going to be able to replenish it so that you can work as highly anaerobically as much. So you won't be able to go as fast. Over the course of a 2-hour effort, it's not as big a concern over something like an Ironman bike course or a Leadville Endeavor, or something that's in the 3 to 5 to 8, 10-hour range. So you could probably get away with going into the red, which typically it's anaerobic, so it could happen. To some extent, it's happening all the time, but it starts to really happen when you start to push above threshold. So if you're going above threshold frequently, you're really blowing through fuel that you're going to have a hard time replenishing. Mm-hmm. Will that impact you over the course of 2 hours? Maybe, maybe not. That's for you to gamble with if you want to. I recommend keeping it at that 0.85, like Nate said, starting out conservatively. If you're feeling good, picking it up over time. If you have a couple of spikes here and there, don't sweat it.
This is why they say don't go out too hard on a time trial.
Yeah.
And what you're really asking for is, how do I pace a 2-hour time trial? Mm-hmm. And I think this is, I've never done it, but Mount Lemmon I think is pretty consistent. Mm-hmm. What can happen is sometimes you get pitchy, and maybe switchbacks or something, and people go,
they gas it.
They gas it every switchback, right? They take the short one, they don't take the long way, and they keep punching over threshold. Mm-hmm. And that's where you could go into the red I hate that. I don't like the word into the red. I don't hate it.
Not
I just
precise.
don't like it. You're going over your threshold too much. you're going like 120%,
Yeah.
and you do that 10, 20 times.
And it's not just fuel depletion. I mean, so even if you got the glycogen to fuel it, what if your muscles aren't used to that sort of abuse? Like me at single track 6, where I had to keep on drilling it, and then I
that race
cramped
was red.
catastrophically. I mean, cramped to the point where I'm laying on the ground. I can't do anything to get up because I kept pushing myself, as you've put it, into the red.
I like to think that that's because I was behind you. You saw me. Chad saw me.
You were so not a part of my day at that point.
Chad saw me crashed on the side of the road because I was ahead of him. That's when I probably broke my Yeti.
Yeah.
And he just said, "See you, Nate." And then he pushed really hard.
I did not say
I'm
that.
going.
It was so steep at that section you couldn't have stopped if you wanted to. So just in your defense.
Yeah, it wasn't Chad going for anything. It was too steep. You just couldn't help it, man.
It's survival mode.
So I feel like we just dispelled a myth. I think a lot of people equate that to like an RPM gauge in their car when it goes red, and they look at like their heart rate.
You can go into the red as much as you want. You just have to realize it bears consequences. Whether or not you can bear them out, and that's for you to figure out. Over the course of a 2-hour ride, Matthew, I wouldn't be too concerned with it. If it happens from time to time, don't sweat it. If you're doing it a lot, well, yeah, it's probably going to impact the rest of your ride.
Right. That makes sense. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for submitting your questions. Once again, you can do so at TrainerRoad.com/podcast. And for those that are joining us on Facebook Live, you can stay with us and we'll answer the questions that you've submitted thus far. But for those that are just listening to the podcast, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
All right. Let's look at, let's go to the questions. I'm going to refresh this guy. Does your screen go green every once in a while when you look at the Facebook Live feed? If anybody else has that problem, let me know. I get that sometimes. I just have to refresh and it goes away. Okay. Oh, Luis says I go with DJ Tiesto podcast. That's actually one that I use for entertainment because it's usually around an hour, and then and usually when it's a live set like that, it blends from one to the next to the next.
It's nice.
Yeah,
which is
and
nice.
those steady beats are nice too.
Yep.
Chai says, do you need to monitor heart rate when training with TrainerRoad? Say traditional base program, what heart rate should I be in? The answer is no. Just
even in traditional base, we're still power based.
Yep, exactly right. Always, if you have power, always power, and then heart rate's just a neat little data point thereafter.
Okay, here's Luis has the question. Hey guys, hope you're having a great holiday season. My question is more towards gear. I will be purchasing a new bike in the next year. Here's the issue. I love road, but after a demo ride a couple months ago, I can't shake the gravel grinding bug. I have in mind a bike that I can swap wheel sets to have a road/gravel bike to roll both sides. I am no weight weenie, but do any of you guys have experience with this?
Yeah, I have a few bikes to pop off.
Yeah, I actually did this same setup for my wife. I bought her a Specialized Crux, which is actually a cross bike. They also make a Diverge, which would be more like a gravel grinder bike. But I got that one because I wanted her to have the disc brakes, and now she can ride. She can do a gravel grinder, or she can do road. And the differences in geometry for her, it's a road bike might be a little more aggressive, but you can kind of sometimes solve that with different stems and stack heights and stuff. They're really like close enough, and maybe the handling's a little bit different, but she's not going to notice the difference. And again, maybe weight, like Louise says, she's no weight winning, but you can totally do that. I think, what other bikes would be?
Yeah, so I was just going to, on the Specialized side of things, so if you're familiar with Specialized line on road bikes, they have the Tarmac and they have the Roubaix. We'll ignore the Venge for now. The Tarmac is more the race geometry. The Roubaix is the more relaxed geometry. And when we're talking about their more versatile bikes that you'd be targeting in this case, the Crux is like the Tarmac, and then their Diverge is like the Roubaix. They're different bikes, but it's in terms of like similarities. So if you like a more relaxed geometry, I would go with something like a Diverge. If you liked a more upright, more traditional road racing geometry, then I would recommend something like the Crux. The 3T Strada, 3T makes a bike that is going to be used in the Pro Peloton this year too. It's a road bike, but it has plenty of tire clearance, and
it's one by.
And yes, and it also comes as a one by. But if I was just to spend whatever money I wanted and it was no object, there's zero question I'd get an open up or an open upper. The up opens their bike's extremely light. They have really good handling characteristics in the frames. Like they've balanced out the flex and the performance really well. And they're just absolutely beautiful things. On the upper, you can fit 2.2s. So that's like XC mountain bike tires you can fit on there.
Wow.
And it still makes a killer road bike. So that's what I would recommend. And you can switch like we've done on the Cruxes. We've switched wheel sets, and the Crux is a totally viable road bike.
Yeah, I'm going to do Haleakala on my Crux with the same rims that I use for cross, but just with road tires. So Luis, I would, to your ask if I should get like a dedicated road or dedicated gravel. I think we've answered that, just one. Unless like you just have $1 bazillion, you can get both.
Yeah. Why not?
But I think one thing I would do is I would get 2 different wheel sets. Try to get like less expensive ones, or if you really want to get a race set, I'd get one of, just buy one, because switching tires, especially if like during the summer, you might want to on Tuesdays do a road ride, and then on Thursdays ride on the gravel.
And it's a pain to switch tubeless tires or
any tires.
Even normal tires.
And
switch over it's a luxury, but man, it's helpful.
Yeah, you could. I mean, but if he's asking to spend the money, a whole different bike is a lot of money.
Yep.
And if he's not a weight winnie and he can just get a OEM style, inexpensive tubeless rim setup.
Yep.
I'd
recommend stands. Like you can go with stands, and those are like $600 or $700 wheels that are honestly really, really good. So you can go with a set of stands and do quite well with that. Dan says, how do you do a TrainerRoad workout outside? Can you download a TrainerRoad workout to a Garmin? No, you can't download it to a Garmin, but it's we've talked about this before with more specific workouts or ones that vary a lot in intensity. It can be pretty difficult to maintain those outside, or like a constant at threshold, for 20, 30 minutes. Sometimes that can be difficult, but we try to pick the more simple workouts or the easier ones to replicate outside, and it's just simply a matter of following the structure. So.
Doug asks, he said, I've been riding for about 4 years now. No competitions, just enjoying it, but I feel like I'm fairly serious about it. I just got my first power meter and will start training on it soon. Is there anything that I should focus on as a novice power meter user? My main goals for this year are just to be a strong rider and to get the most out of my solo rides. One thing, Doug, is to make sure you have power smoothing on. It can be normally the first time anyone uses a power meter, it's really sporadic. And
they feel like something's wrong.
Yep, they all like every time they're like, you notice that in your power classes too?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it freaks people out. And just be okay with that, or put on a big smoothing. And then I would pick the low volume sweet spot base one and go through that. And pretty much everything else we said on this episode, it's not that complicated if you use TrainerRoad.
Yeah, makes it simple.
Just do what we say.
We make it easy.
Do what we say. Or do what Chad says.
All right.
Alexander says, I wonder if the plans full distance try include recovery times.
They do. Yeah, the full distance, I'm pretty sure it's every 4th week.
There you go.
Yeah.
Hey, this is a great one. Triton says, I never knew what Nate looked like until these live streams. He looks very suave.
Triton, that was very
Thank
kind
Triton.
of you.
Free account for Triton Manzo.
Checks in the mail, Triton. Let's see.
Mike asks, I use Training Peaks to aggregate my indoor and outdoor TSS, shooting for a specific TSS per week. Does TR have a method for pulling in ride activity from Strava? Not yet. But I suggest that, wink. Not yet, Mike. Stay tuned.
Let's see.
Travis says, as a cyclist, I like how Chad's not even reading them. He's just waiting. But it's probably good because you can listen.
Ready.
As a cyclist, not a swimmer or runner, I have decided to do a sprint triathlon later this year. How should I start my training for swimming? Or what should I look to do when I get in the pool? Thanks, guys.
That's more up your alley.
Yeah, so as a new swimmer, I highly don't recommend, unless you swim in like high school or middle school don't just get in the pool and try to get back and forth a bunch of times.
Yeah.
Immediately spend time on either a private swim lesson, maybe a few, or go to a swimming group where there's a coach there that can give you tips. And with my experience, there's a great masters group here. There's other groups that aren't branded masters. Masters is actually like you pay for like a an annual fee, and then you can go join these master's classes, and you have to pay for those. What I've found is that with all of those coaches, they don't give you tips unless you ask them. Some of them will be like proactive, but a lot of them, like I'd swim for like a month. I'm like, this guy's not saying anything. And then I was like, hey, Steve, could you watch my swim stroke? And then after like 100, he says, try this for today. And then after that, we had a good relationship, and he's always adding like one little thing. And that's usually much more cost effective. If you can't get down to the other end of the pool, maybe a private lesson is good. But I know in the master's classes here, as long as you can swim a 25, they'll have you. So there's people who are like U.S. Masters national champion in one lane, and then you can only swim from one end of the pool to the other without getting tired, which is normal, even if you have a high fitness level, because your efficiency in the water is so bad that you're, it's kind of like you got brakes rubbing, right? And you got a big baggy jersey and I don't know what else, flat tires.
Everything you could do wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And even if you're putting out 300 watts, you're going to go like 4 miles per hour. So get swim lessons, and it's so much better to do that than to like, I'm going to get fit, quote unquote fit, before I take swim lessons because I don't want to be embarrassed with this person. You develop a bunch of bad habits over 4 to 6 weeks, and then it takes 4 to 6 weeks for this person you're paying money to fix those bad habits. It's so hard. I mean, you could theoretically film yourself and try to like correct it yourself and be really diligent about it, and that's not impossible. But it takes a special kind of person, and I think that's really hard to do. So I pay somebody.
And I actually got a lot out of the total immersion drills, and I know you're not a big fan of following that religiously, but it taught me balance in the water, and that was super crucial.
I like total immersion for new swimmers, and then once you get over that comfort and you can swim for a long distance, I don't think you're going to swim like a 55 Ironman swim.
You don't be a fast swimmer with it, but
yeah, that you'll survive. So that's another. You could also
surviving's good.
Surviving's good, right?
In the water.
You could also, that's another. You could buy the Total Immersion DVD or online thing and try to follow those. Again, you might have to break habits later on, but that you'll at least survive, which is key.
Jared had a question where he talked about heart rate. He basically, I'll just paraphrase, and we'll get more into this on the content that will be published on our YouTube channel and on our blog and everything else. But you're basically asking, sure, like if you're riding at whatever power, but your heart rate's really high, isn't that telling you something? And the hard thing is understanding what exactly that is telling you. Because you said, isn't heart rate still valuable for body signaling? In a vacuum, yes, but the fact is, like, even heart rate, that isn't necessarily telling you everything about cardiac output. There's stroke volume you have to add into there. And then, like Chad said, there's the viscosity of your blood. There's so many different things. So the point is it's just less precise. And then with power, what we're talking about is we know that knowing where your threshold's at, we know that if you're working at a specific percentage of that threshold, we're bringing about a specific intensity. Whereas with heart rate, we have no clue if we're actually bringing about that specific adaptation that we're going for. So that's what we're really talking about. It's just a more precise way to bring about the adaptations that you need. And when heart rate takes you off that mark, then it could be doing something that's actually becomes detrimental. It's not that the heart rate data itself is detrimental. It's just what it brings into question. If it's bringing power, an accurately calibrated power meter, into question, it can be tough. So
Camilla asks, so how much time of rest should be after the first 28 weeks?
Oh, so like after going through base build specialty.
Yeah.
So if you're embarking on a new training plan,
I think the question is just in general.
Yeah.
The thing that we get a lot is, I brought up the 28 weeks. It's so structured, right? Like it's here's 28. What's the next thing?
Yeah. So that 28 weeks can be dragged out. So we talked about how if you have you're basically just trying to hold a high level of fitness, we just repeat week 7 and 8, or ideally we're just doing maintenance workouts, and that can be carried for quite some time, depending on the level of fitness that you bring into that span of time. It could be 8 weeks. I've seen athletes drag it out for a couple months, a couple and a half months. Some people, they've got 3 or 4 weeks before they need to, see a downturn. So you can kind of feel that out. It's not super specific. Doesn't mean you have to stop training, or doesn't mean you have to rest right then. Doesn't mean you have to start a new plan then. You can take that fitness and drag it out for quite some time.
That's the point. So like, and if they have, let's say they have an A race 6 months later, they could take rest. And I think the right amount is subjective.
It is,
right?
Yeah. I mean, obviously you don't want to lose fitness, and that starts to happen pretty significantly at about that 10-day break point. But you also want to be reinvigorated, even if that comes at the expense of some of your fitness and you have to start from a slightly lower level than you'd like. If you're ready to train again, you're eager to train again, that's the best place to be.
Kathy asked, in a perfect world with perfect timing for a race, 4-day stage race, is it safe to say sweet spot base 1, then 2, general build, road rate specialty phase, and the last week of specialty, which is a taper week, then the peak would be considered the first week after the race week of specialty?
Yeah, basically.
Yep. Kathy's got it.
Yoon or June, I'm not sure how to say the name, but he said, which one to buy first, a power meter or a smart trainer? And Chris just responded above and said, smart trainer. I actually disagree. I think that you should buy a power meter first because you'll have power inside and outside.
Yep.
And honestly, the smart trainer, it doesn't guarantee better precision. You'll be amazed with some work and some practice what you can do in terms of precision on hitting your power targets with the power meter and a good trainer like a Kinetic Road machine, for example.
It's just nice to have power both indoors and out.
Yep. I totally agree.
Yep.
Jens asks, is a CTL plateau of 90 a bad thing? So what he's talking about, that's Training Peaks metric called chronic training load, and that is the 6-week daily average. And that equals 90 is 630 TSS a week.
Yeah, so that's up there.
It's a good amount of TSS right there for most folks.
I'm not even up there. Like, it's really up there. Like, most people, they hit 630 for a long time. 6 weeks.
Cat 2-ish TSS. I mean, I don't know if they've ever really ballpark or put finite values on that. But when you start pushing into the triple digit CTL loads, you're up there quite a ways. I think Pro Tour riders top out at like 130 to 160, which is sky high. I mean, that's your life is riding your bike and competing on your bike. So anywhere even close to that, you're doing quite a lot of work.
So I wouldn't say it's a bad thing. And if he wants to go higher than that, quit your job. Kidding.
Yeah.
No, but I'm really though.
100 TSS in a full-time job, that's a huge stress load.
But
it is.
To be real about it, to not joke, go to bed earlier. What can you do to improve your nutrition?
Yes.
Reduce stress.
That's where you start bringing in everything else.
Yep.
Yeah.
And to add, depending on
pretty granular at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Like probably if you're doing, especially if you're using TrainerRoad, that extra TSS is probably going to come from longer aerobic rides. You can't just be like, I'm going to do 2 more 2x20s.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to happen.
No, exactly right.
What are Chad's favorite IPAs? I love a good IPA.
Oh man, I don't. It's hard to nail down. I really like 10 Barrel Brewing in Bend, Oregon. They rolled out some of the best IPAs I've ever tasted. Lagunitas is bankable. I like those guys, and they're always big beers, big alcohol, big flavor. And then Sierra Nevada is a safe bet. They have some of the best beers consistently. So let's just give you those 3.
Another question is when we would use a smart trainer versus a dumb trainer and vice versa. I don't like calling them dumb trainers. It's mean to them. But,
Non-smart.
but I know what you mean, that they don't communicate, right? So we've talked about this before. When you're doing like highly variable work, it can be really tough for a smart trainer to keep up, and the lag time that you can get when we're talking like really big swings in power that are short-lived, it can be frustrating to have a smart trainer. Keep in mind the fact that many times is it just as long as it might take to ramp up. A lot of the time it takes that time to ramp down. Not necessarily even, but
the better trainers I've actually even had success with really short. So ultra short work. I was trying that a couple weeks ago, and the better trainers handle it quite well. But I will say it comes after having a ton of practice. So I know how to anticipate the surges, shut it down, knowing when the recovery valleys are going to come. Yep. So it's tricky.
Yeah.
Erg mode is not perfect.
It's not.
And people
think it is.
Yeah. And two, it's erg mode with a power meter is not perfect because so I love Wahoo Fitness and I love their products, but they smooth their power output on their kicker
a lot.
And they actually had a firmware update for like just a couple weeks where they put out like kind of less smooth power, and people didn't like it so much. At least people emailing us.
Yeah.
That they put it back the other way. So
you're still doing the same thing with your legs. It just shows differently.
That's what I said too about earlier in the podcast.
Yeah.
If you show someone that it's at 300 watts and that they're doing exactly 300 watts, it's easier then. Where if you show them the real thing where it's like 310, 290, 305, 295, and it messes with their brain. And as soon as they get tired and they look up and it says 310 for a second, they think they hit 310 for the last 8 minutes, right? Even though if they had no smoothing on, it might just be for the last second. And then you get in this downward spiral. You're like, oh, this is hard. I can't believe it.
Where I find erg mode the most helpful is when I'm doing like a long, not as intense ride where perhaps my focus isn't as required on making sure I'm like, hitting all these marks that are really tough. Like Baxter you mentioned, I find that like a smart trainer for something like Baxter is pretty easy because I can just keep the legs spinning, and maybe that's when I'm watching a bike race and I can focus on that a little more. But I ride without smart trainer. So let's do one more question. Let's see. Oh, okay. Doing an FTP test indoors versus outdoors. Greg, you mentioned the fact that you're coming back from a car accident and you are finishing traditional base. The first FTP test you did indoors, and it was atrocious and you say which you expected since your overall fitness was shot. But now I'm getting cabin fever and want to get out of the house. Will my results be similar, or should I keep that workout the same? Thanks, guys. With testing, I think that it's
repeatable.
Repeatability is the important thing.
Yep.
So
yeah, it's the best case scenario for controlling as many things as possible. So change it as little as you can.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you all next week. Next week is actually going to be at a slightly different time. I believe that we'll be recording it Wednesday morning next week. And we'll be a little earlier, about an hour earlier. So stay tuned for that, and you'll see the notification on Facebook. And you can find the podcast once again at TrainerRoad.com/podcast, iTunes, wherever else. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.